Welcome back to the Dynasty Grind. My name's Peter Howard at PA Howdy on Twitter and Threads and everywhere else you might need an at. We do a live stream every Wednesday. I think we've only missed one, and that was my fault. Every Wednesday from 9:30 it'll close, in season, off season, out season, by season, whatever other seasons there are, and just talk about Dynasty fantasy football and fantasy football in general. If you have any questions, comments, trade ideas, trade questions or comments, I guess drop them whatever little question comment box they have on whatever streaming platform you happen to be watching us on, and we'll be happy to talk about it. We do it in order as it comes, and we tend to talk for way too long about each individual thing. We're just happy to be here and happy to talk a little bit of fantasy football with you. Thanks very much. Zach, my man, how's it going?
Not bad. I know you weren't implying that I go on and talk too much about.
I was directly commenting on how much you talk. Actually, honestly, I can barely get you to shut up. No, it's funny. I saw that you recorded a podcast. I was like, oh, I'll go listen to that on YouTube instead of one of the other stupid things I listen to. And at the start, you were like, it's probably going to be a shorter episode. And I immediately checked the time code. I was like, that's like 1.5 times on a whole episode. Okay, let's go. Let's do this. Let's see what Zach has to say. And it was fun. It was a good episode. I enjoyed it.
It was amusing to me that you did a Taj Washington episode in the same week as the Taj. Like I did a Taj Washington. At least it wasn't a Taj Washington episode.
I thought I was just doing this offbeat little talked about player that no one had mentioned to me because I'd noticed him, but hadn't looked at it closely, and you asked about him. And I was like, oh, that would be an interesting way of like alliterating part of the process. And so I recorded the episode, and that week before I even got it edited and put it out, you'd done one. I saw Addison do a thread. I saw someone else do something. I'm like, fuck, am I actually behind? I thought this was, I didn't even know anyone would be interested, but there you go.
No, he's
I guess
fun.
I won't be interested in mine, but
I was really glad to hear your episode, not necessarily for Taj Washington, but the process. And I know that you've done it before, and I know that we've talked about it. I've listened to you do it on YouTube before. I've listened to you do it on a podcast before, but it's always fun for me to get that little peek behind the curtain and see how you process things. Yeah.
It always feels weird. Actually, it's a part I enjoy because it's a part I try and improve. You know, how am I making up my mind about things? The process, as it were. But it also feels like, and then I read, Dynasty content. I'm like, actually, I'm wrong on this. Everyone's much more simplistic. But I think it's very basic. It's like I go and look and see how well they did without being myopic or looking for a magic number or imagining that everyone has to be a bust or a steal or a sleeper, and just some honest. And I'm like, this is too simple. No one will like it. And then I go and look at some other Dynasty content. I'm like, no, people need more of this. I've decided I'm going to do more of this. I'm actually going to do a whole 40, 50-minute podcast episode on it. Because I don't know, it seems being simple and honest about it is an edge at this point. It's like we've come to the point. Especially, I liked what you said in your episode that we talked about before, that we imagine the fantasy space as being Twitter or the community we're often talking to, and most people aren't like that.
Yeah.
And Leo Pasiga has been talking about how there's a beginning or a beginner area of content that's underserved, or the fact we don't cater what we're saying to different areas of experience or knowledge or breadth of degeneracy. And I'm like, yeah, that's a good point, because mine's kind of blanket. It should work, and I want it to be understandable whether you've played for a day, a week, or a month, like, because I need it to be for me.
Yeah.
But it's true, a lot of content's like, I hate it but I'm like, if this is gauged at someone that's been playing redraft for 10 years but never thought about Dynasty a day in your life, it actually makes some sense. It has a place,
Well, and I also think that we're in a young phase in the fantasy football, the overarching fantasy football community, because a lot of people came back to fantasy football and to Dynasty in 2020, 2021, 2022. Well, okay, so we're maybe 3 years into it. So like people are just starting to sink their teeth into like real strategy, and I think that's been a little bit of the frustrating part, at least for you and the guys who talk numbers, is you've had to rehash over the past 3 or 4 years vacated targets, and you've had to rehash, all of these different things that have been proven and disproven and over a
Debated
long,
and under debated, and it's
yeah,
because it
and
also works in cycles, like, and we forget pain. So like an idea becomes popular and a few of us run it out or do the research or have done it before and we go over it, and you can't convince anyone of shit. And so like it doesn't work again, and like a whole new crop of people that like the idea learn that idea finally from the experience, but then you forget, and 3 years later people are again talking about how one player or the other is too skinny or too short, or runs routes so good, and you're like, no, we've been here before, and it gets tiring the longer you do it, I guess. But no, that's not something that frustrates me. I kind of like having an argument when I'm pretty sure of which wall my back is up against, if you know what I mean. Like not having to and it's always good to redo the research. Like maybe it changed. You never know. Go look at the percentages again. Go look at something. Update the tables, as it were. JC Troller, good evening, my man. How you doing? Anthony didn't fall asleep in the chair like an old man this week. I'm disappointed to hear that, Anthony, but good for you. Good for you. Your energy level's up. I like it. Adunze Jamar. No. Adunze's pretty good. He's very good. Jamar Chase was at that other level of prospect. Tier 2 is meant to be a really great tier of prospect, and that's where Adunze is. Jamar Chase is meant to be that, man, that looks like a little bit of a different kind of a thing, a little bit more certain, a little bit more ceiling, and that's kind of where Jamar Chase fit in, I get that that's becoming popular now.
I still have him below quite a bit below where Chase is, and that doesn't necessarily mean that that's a 1-for-1 and that he'll end up being less than Chase, but like profile wise, he's not Chase.
And that's just like not based on but the way I process, the way I profile, the way I compare. It's just demonstratable. Like this guy didn't beat what most prospects do nearly as well as Jamar Chase did and Marvin Harrison Jr. did. He just didn't do as much. And like Zach said, doesn't mean to say anything about his ceiling. Who else was I? Drake London. There's a conversation in my Discord about whether Drake London's a good sleeper pick or breakout candidate for this year. And there's a good argument. He doesn't compare directly to most of the breakouts, but, it's hard to say he's been bad in the NFL. He wasn't a bad prospect. The situation's improving. I get it. Entering year 3. It's not a bad argument, but the problem is it's Mike Evansing. He's been priced well above that breakout since he came into the league, and he's never really dropped that much. And it's like a Dunze. Like the more you talk about insane level of comparison in order to be the guy who likes him the best, which I promise you can't be, there'll be someone with a bigger follower account that claims he was the one that knew what Dunze was great, and they're the ones that gonna say that everyone's gonna remember being the captain of the boat. You just can't get there. So you can't get that credit, and also all you're doing is pushing out the cost to a place where if he is as good as any prospect ever has been, cool. Like that's the upside. Like you done paid. You done paid for that, so it's a good job. And you just come to this point where it's just almost not worth it. I've got 3 other players in that tier this year, and I'm not saying all of them are as good, but all of them are as interesting as prospects. And he is the only one in that tier getting bumped and bumped and bumped. I'm like, okay, I take the other 3 at that point, and I would have anyway, because honestly, I thought Worthy's profile is a little more interesting, even though it didn't come out as high in my model. I don't think I've got him ranked higher than my model likes, but it still liked him But yeah, not to go in on you, Genzi, but it's like one of the big things on my timeline, and it's just sad. Like, it's like Rashad Bateman. Like, I'll take L's and Rashad Bateman, but the simple fact is, I actually played it smart. I actually think I did okay liking Bateman because his upside got bumped to high hell, and I was like, I can't be in on him as a rookie. And then I couldn't be in on him after a pretty decent rookie year because it got solidified at too high a value. And then in the third year, it started to drop a little bit. And then with an injury, I was like, all right, now I get to like this player. I actually think did some pretty good stuff in college and has been okay in the NFL. And once again, he had a more disappointing year the following year. But I bought in when it dropped. And that's only everyone in there on the I'm going to hype it so I can be the Bateman guy before that. Literally overpaid and caused some people to overpay so that Bateman gets tagged with this disappointing label when honestly it was just bad process that led. It feels like we did it. He didn't do much wrong. We did something wrong. And all the way, like me, Zach, J. Mike Check, I heard a bunch of people that really like Bateman pointing out that it was going too far, but they're not the ones that get credit or jobs or more influence. They're just more right, which is why I follow and like them. Sorry, I'm bitter today. I'm a bitter bitch. Let's go.
I like.
I hate it. The most popular people are the ones who got it wrong, but the loudest. That's what it is now. And I'm like, all right. I mean, I've only ever been here to get better at my leagues anyway, so I'm good with it. But okay.
And I also think that we're at this point where the draft cycle starts so early and there are so many voices and you get that cacophony that like we have weeks. So like this week is Rome Odunze number one. Point. And I know Genji has been there for like Genji's been on this for at least the last 4 weeks or 5 weeks where he's been an Odunze guy. But this week, if you go
no one saying he's bad.
If you do a Twitter search today though, and search Odunze wide receiver 1, you're gonna get like the Fantasy Life, Matthew Berry's like company saying that. You're gonna get all of these huge profile places, and it's partially to drive clicks because that's something I use air grammar different to say. But by doing that, you take any value that you could possibly get on Odunze and you take out you basically like now you're assuming all of the risk, all of the potential risk of drafting him because you're going to have to take him as the wide receiver 3 or higher, which you're talking pick 106, 105.
Honestly, I mean, this year's draft class is, especially towards the top, the first 7, is good enough that I almost think it won't hurt. Like, if Odunze is your guy in this tier, I would take him as soon as Neighbors is off the board. I don't mind that. Describing him as in the same tier is really just, like you said, it's a clicks, it's an argument thing. Really, the pick doesn't change. Right now, before the draft, at least, I prefer Worthy a little bit, but it is the same tier. I prefer Thomas a little bit, but it is the same tier. And if you took any one of those guys at that same pick, honestly, I think it's a pretty solid pick. Like, there's not a lot to separate them. That's why they're in the same tier. And so most of it is academic, which is also the frustrating part because that's why they can do it. That's why you can get away with they're the same tier because it doesn't actually change the practicality. And that's the frustrating part. Someone just trying to get better. I've been misled by this shit before, and you end up taking him over Neighbors or not considering him with Brock Bowers, and which might be the better pick for my team situation or my league scoring format. And it's just Odunze, and it's like, no, you're being led a little too far for the sake of, content. I hate it. But that's, again, I'm just a little bit of a bitch. Don't worry about me.
I like Pissy Pete.
Don't worry about little old Pete. Don't worry about little old Pete. He's fine. He'll be fine. JT Trillo, the wide receiver bucket explanations on the last pod were very handy. Appreciate it, Peter. Oh, I'm glad you liked it. Yeah. Someone actually asked me to go back over that, and I'm going to with the thing they linked specifically, which is basically breaking out prospects into these 10 10% increments in slot and showing past and current prospects and kind of where they were fitting in. But I thought I'd do a little bit of groundwork before I delved into that anyway. So yeah, it's interesting. The only part about that is one of the most interesting things are bad for a podcast, just reading numbers at you. It's hard to keep it all in my head as I'm saying it. I can't imagine anyone's there like writing down, got to make notes to make sense of this. But I'm glad if you found some of it useful. Yeah. Hi from Twitch. Hey, John. How's it going?
Bosh.
Mr. Bosch himself. Cypher, hey guys, what do you view Trevor going forward? Can he be a top 8 fantasy QB? I mean, that's an okay tier. I think, yeah, he could fit in there. I think he's more top 12-ish, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but 8 to 12 is a little bit different than 5 to 8, which is a little bit different than 1 to 5, which is a little bit different than 1 to 2. So it all matters. I think some of this, I think he's done very well. He's going to keep doing very well. If you were expecting more than this, something went wrong with the process a little bit. Maybe, because I think he was a very solid, it was a great quarterback prospect who's done like these are good results, you know? They're not Mahomes and Allen, but it's worth remembering that those aren't in the range of good results. It's really difficult to hope a prospect has that kind of ceiling, kind of result.
To me, he's a little bit of a Rorschach test where if the person in your league has rostered, especially if they drafted him, but if they've rostered Trevor Lawrence for a long time, I think there's a potential buy window. But you have to be realistic. Where, Cypher, you're saying, can he be a top 8 quarterback in fantasy? Value-wise, ADP-wise, no. I don't think Trevor Lawrence ever becomes a top 8 quarterback again, partially because he has disappointed, but partially because every year you got an influx of the hot new thing. Last year Anthony Richardson passed him. This year, Caleb Williams
and then
will pass him. Probably Jaden
Then you've
Daniels.
got the
have at it,
finish
Pete.
the thought. No, finish the thought.
Well, I just think it's really difficult to have been up there, have fallen out of grace, and then get back in when there's such an influx of so many good quarterbacks. I mean, because Allen's not going anywhere. Mahomes isn't going anywhere. Hurts isn't going anywhere. Lamar Jackson's not going anywhere. Stroud came in last year, so he's up there. Burrow is up there. Herbert is up there. The next hotness, so Richardson is up there now, but Caleb Williams will be up there, maybe Jaden Daniels. Now you're at QB 9, 10. So the idea of Trevor Lawrence getting back into that tier in terms of value, in terms of what the collective fantasy football thinks, I think is probably not going to happen, which makes him a value because he could produce like a top 8 player.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. To try and alliterate or elucidate, perhaps, word a day calendar. I've got a team where I won last year. It's a Superflex league. I've got Dak and Lawrence as my main 2 quarterbacks, and I'm pretty happy with it, right? Now, I don't feel a drastic need to go get rid of Trevor Lawrence, but Dak is an interesting comparison because you have a few players right now that also have that kind of ceiling on a year-by-year basis, like Dak, but aren't going to consistently be there, which is kind of what I think Lawrence is. But they're older and less interesting than people that still think he hasn't quite hit his ceiling. Maybe he's got actual Kyler Murray upside. And so I start wondering if there's value in that. Like, can you switch over to Kyler Murray where everyone's worried about his video games or when they are worried about it? Can you segue over and to get into the Caleb Williams pick because fingernails or some whatever stupid narrative there is around him? So it becomes this interesting area where you might be able to get a player in that range, kind of minimum, but they might show some of that ceiling that's very hard to predict, whereas Lawrence is a little more certain to not necessarily have that in his range of outcomes any more than a Dak, who can easily be top 5 and has, and I think he was last year, but isn't going to do it consistently like a Mahomes, like a Hurts, like an Allen, like a Herbert, or Murray, who have it just in their range of outcomes a little more consistently. There's a little bit of a higher ceiling there. And so you start looking from a value like that. And on teams where the situation might warrant it, you start thinking, what about Goff? What about Kirk Cousins for his at least 1 year at Atlanta? That's a lot further down. But like you're looking at the doldrums of the QE position. After Lawrence, it starts getting pretty ugly pretty fast. I mean, in DLF, Fields is actually still hanging on. It goes Lawrence to a Fields, because it's pretty hard to start picking your favorites after that, because you do have the Goffs and you do have the Kirk Cousins, the Bryce Youngs, the Deshaun Watsons of the world right after him. But in the right situation, you could, like I say, my preference is going for a Murray, trying to get the Caleb Williams pick or the Daniels pick if Zach is in on it that hard. Or Herbert. Herbert's in the Murray section as well. When people hate him, I'm interested in segueing over there. I think he's got that more consistent, higher upside. Or in the right for the right team, like a strong team like I've got there, it might be worth trading all the way down into this terrible area of QB, because it's Jared Goff, but it's Jared Goff for 10 years because QBs play forever, and maybe get a pick that becomes a Daniels or the third quarterback in this class or the third quarterback in next year's class, and starting to improve your upside or your value that direction. So he's really in this. He's fine. Pretty happy to roster him. But I think what I'm taking away from what Zach said, whether he meant it or not, is he's in this area where if you could try and go for that upside with Murray or Herbert, or going down and getting picks or getting value elsewhere is also a good idea, because he's kind of in this awkward middle ground. You know what I mean? That's kind of where I'm at on Lawrence. Like, no incentive. Like, I'm not panicking, but I definitely don't feel as excited about his potential as someone like Murray or Herbert. Yeah. And if they come into his range, I want to move over. If not, also might be possible to start piecing him out, as it were, to try to look to improve value elsewhere, different draft picks, by getting one of these lower ranked quarterbacks, consistently lower ranked quarterbacks. Just an idea, or 7. JC Troller, you mentioned last week about the more valuable upside versus securing floor. I believe in regards to starting running back 2s versus wide receivers in flex. Can you expand on that a little bit? Yeah. I can tell you what I know. I don't really want to open up sheets or reference articles, because I've written about this a few times. And my understanding of it, by all means, use my data or someone else's to check it, because this is off the top of my head. Wide receivers beat the floor more often. In other words, if you're looking to start a running back or a wide receiver, you should start the wide receiver in the flex, because wide receivers score at or above their points per game for the season average more often. Now, that might seem a little counterintuitive, because running backs seem to hit their floor so much more consistently because their volume's a little more guaranteed, but are actually hitting slightly under it or drastically under their average and more often than wide receivers. It's not a huge amount, but it is significant. And also because there's a certain class of wide receivers, a certain type of wide receiver where their ceiling can be that much higher than a running back too, that they also have the upside as well. That's the rough, back to RotoViz days, wide receiver wins the flex kind of an argument. The other part of it is in fantasy football, the floor gets you relatively little. It feels good. It sounds like the right approach, being sensible, being cautious, making sure you secure an average floor. But to Adam Harstad's research, which is a little odd right now, but he updated it not too long ago, and I found the same to be true in my own leagues and doing my own observation and research as well. And you should check your own leagues as well. More games are lost by greater than like 20 or 30 points on a weekly basis than are won. So you're very, very rarely winning games because you maintained a solid floor. You either need to score 50 more points this week, or you may as well not score 10 more points, because you can't win, and you're just going to have thrown value at running back 2 that makes a scoreline look slightly better that week, but didn't win you that week, and now we're on to the next week because it's a weekly game. So now, scoring formats also play into this a little bit, because I'm in a best ball league where the points accrue over the season. So there might be some more of an argument of having a consistent floor somewhere on your roster. But even there, I found it not to be true. It's better to shoot for the highs. I'd rather have 20 points a game 3, 4, 5 times a year than consistently scoring 10 to 12, because that's actually doing more for my roster over the long term, even when the points accrue towards the end point total, which is a win. And definitely, which most of us are playing in a week-to-week basis. I'd rather do a better job winning those 3 or 4 weeks than doing a better job nearly winning more consistently every week. Does that make sense? And again, that's off the top of my head, so I'm not showing you a lot of solid numbers, but that's how I go check. It's actually the easiest way to do it. I replicate what Adam Harnstead did, and I've got that article linked somewhere. It's free at this point. It's old enough, and you can read it through. But all he did is he went back to his league, the league that you're thinking of. Go collect the scores on a week-to-week basis and see how often the points difference between each team was relatively small or relatively large. And relatively can be a different number depending on your scoring format, which is why I'm staying vague about it. And what he found, and I think I can find in my own leagues too, is that maintaining that floor to get close to the 120 points, let's say a week average, means nothing, because you either need to score 200 or you may as well score 30. So if you've got a wide receiver that's scoring 40 or 0, 40 or 0, he's actually doing better for you because you need to hit 200s more often, not 120s. And so the guy scoring you 10 every week might get you more consistently putting up 120, 130, 140 points a week, but you need 200 to win. So it's not actually helping you in a week-to-week game. It's just making your overall scores and your cumulative scores look better, when in fact it's actually hurting you because it's hurting your draft pick, it's hurting your accrue of value, and it's harder to really know what to do with the team in that situation. Whereas if you're going for the min-maxing player, then you know if you're hitting it or you're not, because your record is doing well, you're actually hitting those maxes more often, or it's just time to sell. It's time to move on, renovate the roster. It's kind of more of a rebuild, and taking more of that high-low approach. It's better on a week-to-week basis, and I actually think it works better with most how to build a dynasty rosters. Like, it's time to move on. It's time to stand pat. Whereas if you're in the middle, and this is drawing a little bit from John Bosch over there on Twitch as well, it's almost the worst place to be, because you feel like your team's pretty good and you don't know what it's quite missing, and you can't get extortionate value for anyone, and everyone feels like a bit of an undersell if you trade them right now. And so you just end up towing that line, paying everyone else's league fees to finish third, fourth, fifth. And it can be an awkward situation to find yourself in. And also, again, lower draft picks, harder to build the team with those elite picks at the top, depending on how deep that class is. So I've run on a bit there, but you did ask me to talk about it a little bit. And I've gone from flex spots to dynasty strategy, which is kind of how I view most things. Like, the immediate actions that I want to take, what to do in a flex, has to fit with the way I'm thinking about the way I want to build my team. You might not work that way, so you can pick and choose which parts are relevant to you. But that's roughly kind of what I'm talking about. Zach, do you find that, or am I talking through my ass? Do you think the floor matters, or do you think running backs have consistent ceilings? But I think when I say running back too, it's like they're getting the volume every week, but they're relatively rarely putting up 20 points per game. Maybe it's 15 in a good week, and it's because of who they are in that offense with the volume. And so there's less likely going to be a 30, 40-point game coming. Whereas even like a McCole Hardman, much worse player, much less consistent, but because of the role he plays and not being as good for fantasy, that means that 1 week might be more valuable than the 6 weeks of running back 2 that you get in your flex.
Yeah, no, I think, I mean, we've talked about this an awful lot when somebody like Gabe Davis came up, where PFF was like,
and I dislike those fantasy assets, by the way, but yeah.
But those are the types of or similar types of players that are great as a flex play, because of what you're saying is, when he scores 25 points, you win. If he scores 0, you lose. If your running back scores 12, you still probably lost, even if he scores 12 every week. And so it's that kind of influx of the big points, the variance, the ceiling play. I mean, that's what you're talking about. And again, I tend to play in leagues where there is a heavy tight end premium. And so I end up using tight ends in that way, the way you use wide receivers. But in PPR leagues, yeah, most of the time I would imagine, you're the one doing the numbers. I math during my job. I refuse to math during fantasy football. I'll watch film all day, but that like that theory, that idea makes sense to me, that you want the ceiling plays of those wide receivers when they hit, 20 point, when it's 6 catches for 110 yards and a touchdown. Like, you want that.
Yeah, and I don't math really. I find I think I got a pretty good sense of BS when it comes to like an argument someone's trying to make about a subject. And the ones that don't turn out to be BS, I just remember. And like I said, I'm borrowing from a lot of things now. Like wide receiver wins the flex was RotoViz. I think PFF did work on the volatility wide receivers. And John Bosch talks about that. I actually really like it. It's the one area that I think like I probably should do more of. And I like digging into NFL data and college data. I don't want to mess around copying and pasting league information. But Adam Harstead always just goes right to the source, which is the most obvious and simple thing most of us don't do. Go to your league page, see what actually happens in your league on week-to-week basis. And most of his stuff comes from just looking at what actually works, not in leagues or a broad set of data, but in his league. He literally just copy and paste the weekly things. What's actually happening in this place that I'm actually playing, not this idea, this average, this marketplace that none of us actually belong in because we're on a smaller marketplace of 12 teams. It's actually going on here. And then you've only got 12 numbers you really need to track over 17 weeks. And I really like that approach, and merging all that together, as many people have done before me, I just take the parts that seem to work consistently and run with them. Like I'll let Adam find the genius observations. I will confirm them and then go, okay, I'm going to do that, and I'll tell people about it. And that seems to surprisingly work. You don't have to be the genius. You just have to kind of do what they say when they're not talking out their ass. Sometimes they're talking out their ass, to be fair. But Adam Harstead rarely is, because again, he just takes it to his league page and goes, "This is what's actually happening in the place that you play, not some fictional fantasy. We're all in this this community thing." I like that idea. 18 to QB PPR start 12 was offered Garrett Wilson. Take it for picks 2 and 9. That's high. Let's see. You didn't say Superflex. 18 though. Pick 2 is really important. But Wilson versus Neighbors, you take Neighbors, but Wilson's a little more certain, a little less risky. So your team situation could help you out there. If your team's pretty solid, take Wilson.
It's 2 QB though. You're
did I miss that?
Quarterback? Yeah. So 18.
Oh, right, it's right there.
You have to start 2 quarterbacks. As much as I like Garrett Wilson, I think it's probably 2 and 9.
Yeah, and not for the 9. It's just because that 2 is a quarterback. Yeah. Otherwise, not too far off. Sorry, I said 2 QB. I can see it. I just I was looking for super flex, not 2 QB. That makes it even more important that you should not do that trade. Sorry, my camera's gone all fuzzy. Still fuzzy. Okay. Well, we tried. I totally made notes. Cool. I've actually done that, like listening to some podcast. JJ's podcast is a good one. I'll be listening as I'm driving, and occasionally I'll be like, I'm gonna have to listen to this when I'm at home. I'm gonna have to write some stuff down. I have Cousins. Should I try to trade him for a younger QB? Cousins is almost in the exact opposite situation of Lawrence. He's not in this interesting value range where he's really easy to do that. It's easy to trade down into Cousins. It's not easy to trade Cousins up into anyone else. The best way of trading Cousins that way would be waiting to in season, hopefully scoring points, and you find a team in your league that needs a pretty solid quarterback that is winning. And then you're like, give me a first for Cousins. And that seems, plus, and that seems like a pretty decent trade to them in league while they're trying to score points. Right now, it would seem ridiculous for them. So you kind of have to hold a Cousins, I think.
That Cousins is kind of a prime candidate to get into mid-season Drake May.
Yeah.
Because I don't think May is going to start, or if he does, I don't think he's going to play well as rookie. And so if you've got Cousins putting up points and May, who again I think May is reasonably talented. He's not a guaranteed hit, but I think he's reasonably talented. He's just got some developmental issues that are going to take a little bit of time, and that's the one position that the NFL does actually develop. Like they run either have him play against the scout team or they give him some reps, but he's all like that backup quarterback is always learning, and it's not the case for every position. And so that may be a way to do it, but you'd have to do it in season. You're not going to get him now because right now, everything's at a premium. I think you missed your prime get out of Cousins window.
Yeah.
Well,
in season would always have been better, but just in general, yeah.
And Cousins might
I think
be
just before. Sorry, I was going to say Young might be in an interesting window. It might be the only young QB I think he can maybe throw. But then it's team situation. Is that team competitive? If they feel pretty competitive, Cousins sounds appealing. You might even have to add to get a Young still, but that might be a way to go. But I don't think it's a one answer for all. I don't think Cousins' value is good enough to say, yes, you should. You kind of have to hope your team and their team are in the looking at different things. It's not a one answer fits all leagues kind of a situation. Yeah, and Young isn't the thing, by the way. Value is a thing if you're going that direction, and good is a thing. Cousins is proven #good enough, and so I prefer him to Young and to a lot of quarterbacks right now who are younger, which is why I'm saying it's team situation. Because if you're more interested in the value moving forward, less interested in the points on a week-to-week basis, then you could try and get creative with the Young or a Drake May mid-season, as Zach points out. Otherwise, Cousins is a stronger bet than most younger QBs that you could possibly trade for right now. More likely to put a point, just to be clear. What are the wide receiver tiers? In my ranks?
What are our wide receiver tiers?
General?
Yeah. Because I don't know what
I just put a whole podcast on that.
Have at it, Pete.
I'd stop talking. I think I've got some serious lag. Sorry. I just did a whole podcast on that, breaking down what I'm roughly trying to do with my wide receiver tiers. Tier 1 is meant to be, I can't have higher expectations that they hit, and I expect it to be pretty good when they do. That's the tier. Tier 2 is that, but there's more questions or I'm less certain about the absolute ceiling. So someone like Jamar Chase, Marvin Harrison Jr., they look exactly like they should look profile-wise, and their ceiling is as good as the ceiling gets. In Tier 2, you'll find many as good as a ceiling gets, but they just didn't impress quite as much to hit those top-tier marks. But, there's still pretty good prospects to get in there. Or they have full marks, but their ceiling looks slightly lower. Ladd McConkey isn't in there, but think Ladd McConkey. Even if he hits at his full ball, I don't think he has the ceiling that AB or Calvin Johnson or Julio Jones, like the max wide receiver season. I really don't think that's in his range of outcomes. Even a Julian Edelman. It's not about the way you play. It's about the player's potential to get there for it. Tier 3, there are some warts. Usually at this time of year, that's where I put the players who would be in Tier 2, but I need to know what the NFL thinks. There's draft capital concerns. They're playing in the Cursor Conference. There's something weird on their profile. Like they've missed time. So there might be a higher ceiling, but it's lost in the fact that they didn't play a full college career. And so I'm a little more interested in them than their overall profile looks like, but I need to know the NFL is going to be willing to invest some time in actually giving them opportunity, not necessarily first round opportunity, but some level of opportunity. Round 5 is fine, but I kind of want the draft to confirm some stuff. And below that, it's falling tiers of those 3 things. How good their profile is, what their ceiling looks like if they hit, and then how confident I am the NFL is going to have some level of investment. It's just varying degrees of concern over those 3 things. Roughly.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty similar I approach things, although I mean, not quite as. I think I end up being more like holistic with the way I end up doing rankings, where like I'll just give everybody grades, and then I go look back historically and kind of see where they are too. So like I can tell you that Marvin Harrison Jr. is third overall out of all of the wide receivers that I've watched since 2017. I can tell you Malik Neighbors is 9 overall since all of the wide receivers that I've watched since 2017. And so those two are clearly above everything else. That next group for me, which is kind of a tier 3-ish, because I like Harrison and Neighbors are similar, but Harrison is still the Sesame Street. One of these things just isn't the same. Like Harrison is pretty clearly at the top. The next group is Worthy, Brian Thomas, and Odunze. There's not much to choose between the three of them, so I kind of that'll be the tier that I attack at the back end of the first round of rookie drafts. Where like if I can get back in at like 110, 111, 112 and get whichever one of those, it won't be Odunze, is there, I'm going to be really happy. If I am drafting at like 106, 107, I'm probably taking Odunze because I know I can't get him later, and I know I might be able to move back in and get Worthy, and I know I can trade Odunze for more if I decide that I want that fungibility of being able to trade him. So it's again, Genji, when we're talking tiers and we're talking rankings, it's not necessarily how you need to draft players. It's this is our estimation of what we think of these players. But if you put it side by side with either ADP or somebody else's rankings, or the way your league feels about things, they're going to be vastly different. And that's how to kind of identify players that I think end up being of value. So again, just for examples, because these are kind of the players where I made my bones. But AJ Brown was going at the back end of rookie drafts. AJ Brown was my wide receiver 1. So I knew that I could go back as far as 107, 108 very comfortably and get AJ Brown. The next year, the same thing with Justin Jefferson, because everybody was looking a year forward and thought Jamar Chase was the guy and Jefferson was just a secondary piece. There was N'Keal Harry. No, that was AJ Brown was N'Keal Harry. There was CeeDee Lamb. There was a really Jerry Jeudy was in that class. There were a bunch of really good running backs that were in that class. So it was kind of an interesting setup, but you could see from my rankings versus consensus that there were going to be some places that you could get value. And I think that's the thing, Genji. It's not necessarily what are the tiers, it's what are the tiers versus consensus, and where can you kind of make up a little bit of ground that way.
Yeah, I think in terms of my NFL ranks, tiers work a little bit more that way. I think one of the main differences in my head for rookies is your ranks are more primarily based on an opinion about the player, whereas all of my elements, my 3 elements, are about the player, and 2 of them have a heavy part of it is what I think of how good they were. But my ranks are the profile, not the player, if that makes sense. Like it's like I was thinking while you were talking, Michael Mayer last year. Like I could admit, like I see that Sam Laporta's a better player, I get it, but I had to include the draft capital and the interest from the NFL, and it's just like, man, profile wise, Mayer fits the bill a little bit better. Even though speaking with you, I was like, yeah, I prefer having Laporta a little later, but profile wise, Mayer gets bumped. Because of his draft capital. I believe that's how it worked. So, and again, that's a good example of how my processes work, I guess. But my ranks and tiers are more about the profile than my specific opinion of the way how good they were at playing. It's not
a
lot of that, but also where they're coming from, where they were drafted, how much they essentially look like the most likely players.
And so for me, that's all post-draft. for me,
Right.
post
That makes sense.
draft, that's fine. Like the NFL tells me what they think of all of that stuff that you've already baked into your process. But also it's part of the reason why I like to listen to you. It's why I like to hear what Dave Wilsey has to say about running backs. It's why I like to incorporate that once I've already done my film work, incorporate the guys who are doing the numbers, because you guys are putting in different checkpoints than I am necessarily. Like, even though you're getting the numbers from the same place I'm getting the film scores.
No, I
Like,
get you. Yeah. If we had no
we're
differences in the way we approached it, it'd be a very boring conversation. We'd just be arguing
it
whether
would.
it was a good or a bad route. Good route, bad route. You know, I'm joking, but yeah, we have differences doesn't scare me. You just got to be aware of what they are. One, when listening to both of us, and two, when you're choosing Zach's over my opinion. You know, that's a good reason. I've been asked about this guy twice in the last hour. I don't think he was a CFB player, in that if you look him up on College Football Reference, he doesn't have stats, so I can't include him in the database. And my opinion of him is that I don't know.
Do
Any
you want me to give?
statistics he has at this point won't be comparable to any other player in the database, because I think below a certain level, it's like comparing how good you were at selling cars versus how good you were at, working in a front office. Like, they're different jobs. And it's very hard to compare performance reviews that way, if you like. So yeah, it's going to be a mystery. I'm going to need NFL stats to start coming up with an opinion on them, or following the trends. Again, people that actually watch the tape are going to be able to come up with a more somewhat, hopefully, if they're real, if they have a reasonably solid process, opinion on how good they are. Because I don't know how you adjust to that cornerback is actually a car salesman. Instead of, or an insurance salesman or whatever else, instead of an actual NFL prospect at quarterback. I don't know how you do that. I know I can't. I don't think anyone can do it numerically yet, at least. And I know I can't. So I don't put them in the database. I could go to the effort of collecting those stats outside. I used to. And I know Dave Wright used to put a lot more effort into doing it for a lot longer than I did. And the main reason is I think it was doing more harm, because people would look at the dominators next to each other. I'm like, yeah, I can't put the note on each and every one that those dominators may as well be from entirely different sports. Like, they don't compare well. You can't compare those numbers. So I gave up on it. But yeah, that's all I got on Loeb. Sorry.
That's okay. I watched
him. There
yes.
you go. There you go.
Yeah. So he is primarily a pass catcher. I mean, I know he had last year, not this past year, but 2022 had 245 carries and 1,200 yards. But he's really a pass catcher. He had 49 receptions the year before, 68 receptions this past year. Very smooth as a route runner, is even smooth off the release. He can be split out wide. He can run routes as a receiver, but also run from the running back position. So, you're talking wheel routes and screens and that sort of thing, on top of being able to split out wide and run actual wide receiver routes. He's a very good receiver, has fantastic hands, will make adjustments, will add yards after catch. He's very quick to transition from the catch point to a receiver, to a runner. He, again, is so good at, and his quarterback play at UNH was not exceptional, and he's so good at being able to account for a poor throw and still make something out of it. He also was a kick and punt returner, which doesn't necessarily help you for fantasy, but gives you a little bit of that idea of him being able to be trusted as a receiver and also have a little bit of that wiggle. I think he will run well off tackle, and his secondary speed is a little bit deceptive, but overall speed is going to be an issue. I don't think he is elite speed, and it's definitely going to be an issue as a pass blocker, because if a quick defender comes off that edge rush, he is not fast enough to process and get to where he needs to be to make a block. And as good of a receiver as he is, I think sometimes he's really slow to present after he chips. So, like, he'll make a block and then slip that block and then wait like 2 beats too long before he turns to present a target to his quarterback, which, if he's going to be anything in the NFL, it's going to be a change of pace, pass catching back, and he needs to have that cleaned up. And I don't think he's a very dynamic cutter. I think he's got great vision, but he doesn't have great escapability. Fun fact though, Nick, for you on Dylan Lobby is his game at the beginning of this year against Central Michigan. This game was better than 34 individual seasons receiving for the top 18 running backs in this class. He had 12 catches, 295 yards, and 2 touchdowns in one game receiving against Central Michigan. So there you go. He put it to the Chippewas anyway.
Can you remember the last prospect you watched from a non-CFB team that went on to do pretty well? And there are any similarities? Like part of what you were saying was he's doing a lot of special teams work, and I was wondering if you're an NFL level good player and playing in a non-CFB team, I'm assuming they just constantly want the ball in your hands. Like, let's put him on defense. Why not? And so that's the way my logic works. So I was wondering if the ones who do pretty well in the NFL constantly are getting those kind of extra, just get him the ball touches.
So it's really difficult to me to watch smaller school players and to have that translate, because again, the players that they're playing against are not as gifted as they are. They're just not. Like Dylan Lobby playing at New Hampshire, he's better than the teams that he's playing against. And so that part is difficult. You also, to me, and this is not a great, I mean, this is really subjective. It's not a great, but there is
point we have to accept that that's as good as anyone can do.
Well, but there is just something about those players who hit from that level. So James Robinson is going to be the real easy example for me. That a couple years ago I watched James Robinson. I actually just somebody brought up a tweet that I had in July about how you should be rostering James Robinson, before his rookie year where he led the league in rushing. And there's something about that type of player. Dylan Lobby is not that type of player. The one small school prospect in this class that I think does have that potential is Kamani Vidal out of Troy. And so he is a little bit of absolutely everything that you want in a small school runner, and also feels like he's got that little bit extra NFL talent too. But again, things have to break exactly right for those players. I mean, I've heard JJ Zachariason has brought up Isaiah Davis out of South Dakota State too. And I've watched him. He had big numbers for a couple years in a row. Just doesn't quite have the speed and dynamism that I think we're looking for.
That's fine, man. And the way I approach that would be exactly what I think is common sense for everyone. So the minute it hits the third round, I'm either looking for someone I like, or I'm like, Zach mentioned that guy. I see where I can roster him at the back of my roster in the third or fourth round. I'll be pretty happy with it. Fourth, fifth. Depends what the draft is.
Yeah.
I've been a Rondell truther. Tough life. You're not alone.
Damn.
Now he's in Atlanta. Should I finally give up on him? Giving up is relative. At some point, you can drop a player and no one does anything about it. You're not really giving up. You just got them beat. And it's okay. I will still roster Rondo a few places. He's still a dynamic player. He's an above average NFL player as well. He's just never have and probably never will gain a role that we hoped he could in the NFL, but he's been very capable in what he does. And I think he can easily be startable in weeks. Like Rondo Moore is not someone I feel compelled to drop, but yeah, if you're talking about is he about to break, we're well outside the breakout window or whatever else. Yeah. You like Rondell as well. Don't look at me like that. We were both
I
like,
know,
yeah,
I do.
pretty good.
I do.
Pretty good.
But what happened with Rondell Moore was kind of the fear with Rondell Moore is
yeah. I mean,
a lot
it hit within his range of outcomes, if that helps. We knew it was there.
a lot of how he was used in college was gadgety, and it wasn't everything that he was used as. And I think he's a much better downfield receiver than he is given credit for in the NFL. Every time he's been asked to do it, he's done it. He just hasn't been asked to do it, and it's hard to envision that they're gonna, especially in an offense where you've got Kyle Pitts and you've got Bijan Robinson and you've got Drake London. It's hard to imagine a scenario where he's going to get enough run to be viable. So,
strangely enough, Rondell Moore's one of the last things I spoke to Matt Kelly about. I did a player profiler episode before that draft class, and we were talking about it. And the way my concern with Rondell Moore came up is he's excited about a guy with good receiving numbers, which I like, and the athleticism stuff, which I could care less about. And the way I took it was the athleticism is my one main concern with Rondell Moore, because you've got this 1 year player that at age 18 was just a really huge part of the receiving offense. That's why I like him. But you've also got this age 18 player who is physically dominant over 23 and 24-year-olds playing a more gadgety role the rest of the time in college as well. I was like, how much of it is his physical ability? And if we'd seen the rest of his college career play out, would we actually see him have developed a full receiving role? Or is that just a 1 year, he's a phenomenal athlete thing? Then you're going to go to the NFL where it's not a developmental league, has limited experience, and he's always been winning based on just being more physically capable, dynamic than everyone around him. Is he really going to develop into a larger role, more fantasy profitable role in the NFL? And I was really reaching. It felt like a huge reach. Now it feels like I got it right. But at the time, that's putting together three different ifs, right? He's doing well because of this. He's doing well because of that. The NFL isn't developmental. Those are all speculations of mine. Now it feels pretty solid. But I did put it in his range of outcomes. I don't know if that's the actual reason, but it's how I knew to be cautious a little bit. I think he's an interesting guy to keep in mind. So he's clearly a good receiver in that 1 year at age 18, which is phenomenal. Hyper athletic profile. Drafted into the NFL to a good team with a good quarterback and a good situation, and it all came together to be somewhat disappointing. He's still gotten on the field, gotten routes, been useful to the team in a variety of different ways. But like Zach said, it's been more gadgety, less fantasy relevant, less volume. Yeah. And it's one of the things just to put in your back of your mind, where if we get enough of them, maybe we can find some commonality at some point. But right now, we're just, this isn't what you're asking, Paul, but I think he's an interesting player to keep in mind. Because he was good in college. Damn it. Do you have any must-sell wide receivers? I don't have any must-sells. Probably come up with them. But here I haven't gone through my NFL stuff yet. I've been in college.
Must-sell is kind of an interesting term, but like it's for me, so for me, it's the older players who are at the end of their career, but still producing, so you can still get some, something for them. So it's the Devontae Adams, it's a Mike Evans, it's that tier of player, but it's not now, Genji. It's you got to wait till they score points and then sell and recoup value. But I don't think that there's anything necessarily right at this moment that I would consider a must sell. I mean, I guess Pickens could be a fun one because he's like right now peak value, but
Looking at my ranks versus DLF consensus, so ignoring ADP, just looking at my ranks versus other rankers, because the way I see it, the rankers are if you played in a good league, right? So you've got these 7 people who all play in a lot of leagues. One of them's Ryan McDowell. And polling their ranks is a better way of coming up with what a good league might think than even ADP in some ways. So I like looking at my ranks versus ADP when answering this question. Somewhat questionable, but that's what I'm doing. And then, so when I look at that table, the players that come up are players on the edge or outside of their more common breakout arc that people would love to hype up as post-hype sleepers, or maybe this year, like Rondell Moore, but 2 years ago kind of a thing. And so for that, you've got Jackson Smith Think Jigba. He's a little low for me compared to Michael, because I still have hope. I think his rookie year was solid, but it was not as impressive as I was hoping. And he's in the top 20. So like, it's borderline, but there's this window where you can get out with a slight plus in what you got in on and avoid that risk. I think for some teams, that's not a bad idea if your team's more building than winning. But he's a points per game proposition, but he's a young player, which means you kind of have to make a decision on which direction your team's going. And if it's building, JSN's a little bit too risky for me, so I put him on the list. But then you've got Cortland Sutton, Traylon Burks, if anyone's still holding out hope for these guys. Traylon Burks, another guy I liked a lot, so it's not like I don't understand it, but all well outside the window. Jahan Dotson, Jameson Williams, those type of players, the players who are they're on the outside of the arc for me. I think they're more risk than reward at this point, especially if you're not looking points per game. And then you've got players that are in their breakout arc that I'm just a little lower on. I think they're more risk than reward based on their price. So they might be the closest. I don't rank this way. It just seems to be what it's describing, by the way. So Drake London and Brandon Ayuk, both of whom I think are really solid prospects to have a good year this year. Drake London, like I said, is in a breakout year. 3rd year top 12 breakout would not be obscene. He's had 2 years of nearly 11 points per game. And it's hard to say he hasn't been good at the NFL level either. He's been pretty solid. But right now he's ranked inside the top 20. And I'm just pulling him back down towards the 30-ish ranks. I think there are a lot of good players that have done more or on similar breakout arcs that you can get slightly below where you can get London in his current DLF consensus ranks. And I'm more interested in them with a plus than Drake London by himself. And Brandon Ayuk is just always this post-hype sleeper thing. Like I'm on the Debo side of that argument if we're still having that argument. Again, it's a great year for Ayuk to have a career year. I'm not saying I don't like the idea, but he's ranked as wide receiver 13 in DLF consensus. Again, I think like we talked about with London before, and like I just did with London, I think they're priced at what is a good price if they do it. And so I'm just a little lower than where my consensus rankers are, because I'd rather have the plus and avoid the risk for another good player on that arc or that's already broken out. The other type of players in that bottom half of the list in terms of my values are older players, but I'm trying to be a year earlier because I know you freaks are going to freak out at some point, and I want to be early, and then later I can be all about the old guy again. So Tyreek Hill is in that mold right now. I don't think anyone's panicked about his age yet, certainly not his personal behavior. We seem to be able to put that aside. If they're not already, people are going to start telling you, make sure you sell Tyreek Hill before anyone realizes he's not 25. I think we already know that. And so now might be the last-ditch effort to get what is a good, fair price for Tyreek Hill for the next year or two. Because after this point, I think you're constantly looking at people saying, but he's old, but he's old. He's still worth what he is right now, but people are going to start being the psychology of Dynasty. Zach taught me, hesitant on Tyreek Hill more and more. And so now's the time to be thinking about it. Depending on where your team is, then when everyone says, no one else knows, do it now. Because by then everyone is fully already on tilt. Because the one thing you know is if Twitter's saying it, it's last year's news. So I'm trying to be a little ahead on Tyreek Hill. Stephon Diggs is well into the getting an age discount, by the way, especially after the trade. And so I'm actually one of the higher rankers on him. I have him 16th. DLF consensus has him 25th. Tyreek Hill is where Stephon Diggs was a year ago. And so Tyreek Hill will probably flip in my ranks as well this time next year. But it's not the player. It's a dynasty. I think it's gonna I think is what I'm playing there. Mike Evans is another one. I was low on him last year. This year, I'm one of the highest on him because I just stayed I lowered him a little bit before everyone else. Then I've just stayed there. And suddenly I'm one of the lowest rankers to one of the highest. Seems to work for me. And no, do with that what you will. Drew Sorensen Music, one of two. Hi guys, Zach made a donation to Fantasy Cares. I don't need a thanks. Well, I'll take a small
hold on.
thanks.
Yes, no, thank you. Like that to me, Drew, is like I appreciate you donating and getting the film notes, but like I appreciate you donating so much. Fantasy Cares is awesome, and the way that the community has come together and just kind of been galvanized to do good through that, it's like that epitomizes what the community is all about, and to be part of that, Drew, is absolutely awesome, and I thank you.
No, Drew, that's pretty awesome. I was going to say I donate every year by getting a shirt because I don't buy clothes for myself, so I get to donate and actually have clothes. Like as you can tell, like it's literally my wardrobe. But that's a better perk, to be honest with you. Like, and to be clear, you really can't get them any other way. I know the man. I talk to him every week. I can't read his film notes unless I go to Fantasy. I can ask him and he'll send me a screenshot, and it's not quite the same thing as just being able to go and look and read at your own leisure, you know? So like it's for real. It's a perk that you only get through donating. So that's pretty awesome. He also says he is looking forward to enjoying these rookie write-ups this weekend, and you should be. They're pretty good. He's a pretty good writer too. Thanks for putting that together and giving up this place to make a difference. Giving us this place to make a difference. I can read.
I appreciate you. Yeah.
Genji, who's underrated in this class? Thailand running back, wide receiver. This is like the sleeper question from last year. It's so awkward for me. I think, I don't know what. Having versed myself to consensus, because I don't think there is one on rookies yet. But a brief look, I think. No, Worthy's fine. Thomas is fine. I think Franklin's a little undersold here by DLF consensus as a wide receiver 7, but that's not really. That's actually pretty good. Kieran Coleman's oversold. Leggett's oversold. Roman Wilson's oversold. Ricky Pearsall, depending on how you say it. He's wide receiver 12 right now, which is a solid rank, but it's like the third round of a rookie draft by the time you get there. That's a little undersold, I guess. Yeah, I think the best answer I still have for this, because I'm higher and lower on a lot of these guys. All their ranks seem fair. It's probably Taj Washington. Let's just keep rolling with him because we were talking about him last week. Like I think he's interesting. I don't think he's the next Puka Nakua or anything, but I think he's actually of interest, and doesn't really get much interest in terms of ranks yet, which is probably the biggest undersell I can find you. But again, don't go throwing value at trying to get Taj Washington, but if I see him in my rookie draft at his current 0 rank, I'll probably end up picking him up in all of them. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, and that's I agree with that. Yeah, so wide receiver for me, I mean, you mentioned Taj Washington. The other wide receiver that crept up on me is Javon Baker. Like, I didn't anticipate liking Javon Baker's film as much as I did, and I liked it quite a bit. And so he kind of creeps up into that. Tez Walker is the other one that I think people are lower on than I am. So somebody the other day tweeted out, I can't even remember who the wide receiver was. I think it was Jermaine Burton to the Chiefs, and they were like rocket emojis, and I was like, no. I said Devontae Walker to the Chiefs, and that would be the rocket emojis. As for running backs, already talked about Kamani Vidal. He's one, Genji. The other one, and I just watched him out of Marshall, and it's going to be interesting to see how the NFL reacts because he tore his biceps at the Senior Bowl, but Rasheen Ali is 7 different kinds of dynamic. I think he is 4.4 fast. I think he makes quick decisions behind the line of scrimmage, is really good at the second level and in the open field, which is fun because he can get there. And he is really fast with his long speed. He's undersized, but he can run inside. He makes cuts, has good quickness, has enough pass catching ability to be able to give you what you need in the receiving game. He will put his head down a little bit and just hit that burst button. And sometimes that's not great because sometimes there's a linebacker in the hole and he's bursting into the linebacker. And that, it's not the situation that he wants to put himself in. Sometimes he feels like he is a race car driving on racing slicks, where like he'll go real fast, but he can't turn when he's going real fast. So at speed, I think he's less dynamic, which sounds strange, but he flattens out his cuts at speed, and he's got a little bit of a ball security issue where like he carries the ball with two hands. He does a really good job, but when he gets into contact, he brings the ball up with two hands into the contact, and that leaves him susceptible to having the ball knocked loose. But Rasheen Ali is one of those running backs that I think is pretty underrated right now. I mean, everybody's going to give you somebody like Marshawn Lloyd, but I want Kamani Vidal or Rasheen Ali, and they'll go later in drafts.
Is Rashid Ali a running back then?
Rasheen, yeah.
Rasheen.
From Marshall.
Yeah, I the running back, I guess. I was going to say Tez Walker. I have him as wide receiver 6. Consensus, he's wide receiver 16. So, yeah, that's pretty good answer. I didn't even notice that. It's a switch between the Tez and Don Tez. I didn't even see it as the same player. Marshall is a pretty good answer at running back, I guess. Will Shipley, Aldrich Estime. That's not how you say his name. I just like being silly. Guess it Carson Steele. He's just got not a great, but an interesting profile, and it's a pass catcher, and he's one of the younger running backs in this class. And when you're looking for some upside, both of those things have it. Yeah, it's just not a name I hear about a lot. At tight end, just since we're doing 2 at a time there, Zach. Yeah, I have a great answer for you. Ben Sinnott is a tight end 5 in DLF ranks right now, but again, he's ranked deep enough that it puts him in the 4th round, which I think is pretty underselling the tight end rank, but that's just how low tight ends are going more than anything else. I think more interestingly at tight end, outside of Ben Sinnott, not that Ben Sinnott is less interesting, I just think he's a well-known name that lots of people feel he's like the tight end 4 in this class and pretty good. It's probably Brevin Spann-Ford is ranked above him in DLF, by the way. So I was going to say him, but I don't think he's sleeperly at all. So maybe Eric All.
Yes, Peter. Eric All is the answer to that sleeper question. Injury history a mile long, transferred in to Iowa, and again, the things that he does when he is healthy are exactly what you want to see from tight ends, and you ought to be able to get him in the 3rd or 4th round of rookie drafts, and that is a fun place to take an Iowa tight end.
Some guy like freaked out on me on Twitter the other day. I left a comment like a month ago saying, are you really an Iowa tight end if only 34% of your targets were in Iowa? Because he transferred there for his last year. It was just a joke. It wasn't even a take on the player. And he thought I hated Eric All. I was like, no, I just think it's funny, Iowa tight end, but it's not like, could we learn about players? No, okay. But my notes on him said, didn't have a great year. Again, there are injuries playing into his career in general, like you said. But he had a greater target share than receiving yards per team pass attempt, which I don't think is necessarily a terrible thing for a tight end. It's both interesting. It's more interesting than anything else. But he had 0.8 receiving yards per team pass attempt, which is what puts him below Brevin Ford and Ben Sinnott and those types. His yards per route run, yards after catch numbers are good, however. So on a per touch basis, he's actually performing really, really well. And I think it's also interesting, just looking for those mysteries at tight end. I think it's interesting that Iowa found him interesting enough to bring him in and try to run him for that last year. I actually think that's a positive note in his favor from 2023. And also, especially in this class, his size alone make him relatively interesting. He is I'd have to look it up, but he's actually tight end size. He's not like borderline. He's 250, 6'3" kind of a guy. And with all that putting together, yeah, I think it's actually a pretty interesting prospect. I've got him as a tight end 7, but don't let the number fool you. You know, like he's in the same tier as Brevin Span Ford. It's about what does the NFL think at that point at tight end. Yeah, if you want injuries, by the way, just because I think he deserves us looking him up, I really think you should all go check out the Austin Stonga, don't know how to say his name, story. Like he got wrecked by an injury pretty early on in his college career, but before that, he was putting up more interesting numbers than the top 4. I don't know what that means for his future. I don't think he's a sleeper tight end, but his injury came from an infection after the fact, and it's about post-health care and what could have been. And he might get some NFL interest, but I think he's a player worth checking out and knowing about, if only for some of these kids get it rough even when they show talent. And I think he's an interesting player at tight end to know about. Tyrone Chasey this year, David Johnson, Purdue running back. I've been asked to put him in my database every day for the last 3 weeks. Here's the thing. He was in there 4 weeks ago. Like, and I think it's the dual. I think he's listed as both a wide receiver and a running back in college. And so people keep going to the opposite tab. And then I'm like, okay, I'll switch him over. And then they go to the other tab and someone else complains. And he's just been ping-ponging back and forth between running back and wide receiver. And I'm just keeping him as a running back. I don't think his profile looked that interesting. Just quick, too long, didn't read. I wasn't particularly interested. I didn't see David Johnson. But I do know the name. Zach, what am I missing? On tape, is he just the next David Johnson?
Haven't watched him, Peter. I probably won't by the time the draft comes in, but he's on the list. So like maybe Genji between now and tomorrow at 9:30, I will have watched him and written him up. I can't promise, but I'll give it my best shot. He is the next player on the list. He was a player that J. Mike mentioned when he was running off all the running backs on the tip of his tongue last week or the week before, because J. Mike was out last week.
He definitely isn't going to look like a David Johnson, because David Johnson didn't have this problem, but where he was wide receiver, running back, one or the other, his stats just aren't showing up for me. He's listed as running back, so I think that's how he tested the combine, if I remember right. That's why I chose the running back tab to Finzies. I'm not moving him back and forward anymore. But that means his average college rushing attempt share is like 7.7%. Now, that is an average, so it's clearly not telling the full story. That is not a David Johnson profile. Like David Johnson was easier to spot because he played running back a lot and played it really, really well at a lower conference. That's not that. I mean, maybe his on-field play will be similar, but his profile is distinctly not. But again, you can tell he's got receiving stats, which is good for a running back prospect if he's going to play running back in the NFL, because we like those things. Yeah,
but they're not
like
even.
10
They're not
a game in his last season. Like I don't know what to do with this.
It's not even eye popping though. Like his receiving stats, for
like,
a receiver,
like 1.5 receptions a game, 2 receptions a game, and then 1.7 receptions a game. At age 19, he did have 3 receptions per game, which is solid for running back, but not like crazy. So, yeah, his numbers just aren't going to jump off. I'll be interested to see what you have to say, Zach. Might be.
I hope I have something to say. I don't know if I'll get there or not, but I'll try.
Paul Cicero, good name. If I'm trying to trade for Devontae Adams, another good post-age discount player, to be fair, or Stephen Diggs, yeah, in full PPR, what's fair trade value? Right now, a first, probably after the 6. Could get him. I'm not. Anyone with sense isn't going to give you either of them for a first, but if they're building, it's a fair offer. Yeah, I would say.
Yeah, and I don't mind. Like honestly, I don't mind throwing 2 firsts at them if they're after 108 this year, or if they're a year or 2 out. David Johnson, by the way, Genji was 6'1", 224 pounds. So it's a little different than being 5'11" and almost 200. Like David
Maybe he
Johnson
plays like
was
that.
Yeah. Well, and David Johnson, you talk about that came from small schools that were easy to identify. David Johnson was a small school player who was
Yeah.
pretty easy to be like, oh, yep, this guy is pretty good.
Kikoop, hey fellas, in my 10-team Superflex League, I just held a vote to increase it to 11, start 11. I have the number 6 pick. With this extra starting flex slot, would you value Barrows, Odunze, Mayer, or Daniels? Thanks for your time. No problem, kid. And the thing I'm going to say off the top is I don't change players. I don't change who I would draft in a rookie draft based on needs or team situation, or at least scoring format a little bit. You've got QBs that's a little more valuable in Superflex, like in your league. Tight end premium does a little bit for tight end, but not too much unless it's a Brock Bowers. So I'm not adjusting too much because of your extra flex spot, but I think it's a solid idea, and I hope you guys enjoy it. I don't think I would flip my values of a Odunze Bowers because of that extra flex spot much. Both are very. I think Brock Bowers is the type of prospect where it's a tight end you would consider as a flex upside, and Odunze is a wide receiver that more consistently wins the flex spot, so kind of a tie there. As far as May and Daniels go, they're quarterbacks, so they should already have immense value to you in the Superflex League. Barrows and Odunze, for me right now, both rank over those two quarterbacks. So again, I have pretty high value. Well, May might be in my top. I haven't decided on my QB2 yet, but he might be above him.
I think that Daniels is the guy over May, and
he's the other guy who might be my QB2.
Kid Coop, like to me, and it depends on the value of quarterbacks in your league. It depends on the scoring in your league. It depends on what your team looks like. But if we're vacuuming this, to me, it's Daniels, and then it's a pick 'em between Bowers and Odunze. If there's any tight end premium, it's probably Bowers. If not, it's probably Odunze. But I like the Bowers potential positional advantage over what I think Odunze is. But again, for me, even in a 10 team with a start 11, even with that extra flex, I still am going to take the quarterback thinking that I can trade him for more or trade one of my other quarterbacks and move around that way.
See, I'm kind of letting the draft aside, but I have May and Daniels both in my tier 2, and I'm going to have 2 quarterbacks in my top 3. But so here's a question. Who's the second one.
Here's a question. All right. So Caleb Williams goes 1, Daniels goes 2, May goes 3. What does that do for you? Is it just the matter of 1 and 2 and 3, or is it
it gives me time to actually start listening to people that profile quarterbacks a little bit more. It's honestly the truth. But yeah, I would probably use that as an excuse. All right, Daniels went first. Okay, Daniels it is. I haven't found a good way. May scores higher, but I get that he's not necessarily a better prospect. Both seem reasonably accurate, reasonably capable as quarterbacks. Daniels rushes a little bit more, but May has some striking upside just based on his overall passing profile because he's more of a passing quarterback. Yeah. Don't ask me to get trutherish about QBs as rookie prospects. Like Caleb's you have to be Caleb good before I feel confident about anything. And so I just put him in the same tier. And waiting until the draft is giving me time to take in. Like I need to hear more about him. And so far I've consumed the only content I've consumed is listening to you talk about them and J Mike on the Dynasty Dummy. So I probably need a little more.
Yeah, you probably should.
a little more. Or I just won't. I just refuse. Just everyone's QB2. I don't care.
Caleb
so many party hat games. Appreciate it.
Hey, Dave.
Alex Saucy. Did we answer this?
We did.
It wouldn't change my valuation much. I do think you should probably take one of those quarterbacks over those 2 guys anyway. One of them at least. No, I don't think it changes much of how I rank. Just the extra flex spot. It just increases how viable wide receivers are in general a little bit, but you're only asking about a wide receiver and a tight end. So, and running backs this year aren't much, so I won't worry about it. Alex, how do you adjust your evaluations for rookies that have later career position changes, or do you not? I don't know why I read it like that, but it was funny. McCaffrey and Tracy Jr., for example. It's a good question. I guess at the root cause of it for me is how much did I actually get to see one position or another. With someone like Tracy, I didn't see him play either enough to have a firm hold on it. Which again, it's going to work out for me long term because 99 times out of 10, the NFL is not a developmental league. You're not going to Delaney Walker your way into a successful fantasy career. They're just, they don't fuck around like that. It's like, maybe we can make one out of him. I don't think the NFL is going to make much out of it either. They go to watch running backs and he's barely running. They go to watch wide receivers and he's barely catching, and he's going to fall to a team and have to impress deep down the depth squad somewhere. Not saying he can't do that, but it's against the odds bet, right? And I don't think I'm going to see anything in his numerical profile, even if I was like actually a genius statistic whiz, to go, aha, I can see here that by his third year, he will have impressed with his ability to run routes on the outside when the QB is rushing to the left. I don't fucking know. We're just going to have to hope for some NFL success and we'll move from there. But it's a low odds bet at best. Someone like McCaffrey just is we're talking about the receiver here, right? They're all on McCaffrey's, but
yes, receiver.
Christian McCaffrey's brother is actually in the. Okay, yeah, that's real simple. He was asked. He wasn't a very good receiver. Wasn't a huge part of receiving, and for a second there, he actually decided not to declare for the draft till he realized it feels like that McCaffrey's name gets you pretty far, and then came back in on it. Like it's not about the late career switch. It's that he didn't do very well. There's enough of a sample for me to have a decision on there. And again, I hope he succeeds. I'm not calling the person bad, but his statistical profile looks like ass. It looks like he wasn't a very good receiver in college, playing a relatively undrafted team. And if he gets draft interest, then I'm hoping to see some NFL success to reevaluate what he's capable of. Yeah. So it's all about the sample, in other words, to answer your full question. Now, Zach, that might be a little more interesting for you. If you're seeing a guy playing a new position for the first time in his final year, watching the tape, does it change a lot for you? Or are you still looking for the same things? Can you still make a full assessment?
I mean, it's harder to make a full assessment because I like to start at the beginning of a career and move forward, so I don't get that entirety of a career. Like watching McCaffrey play quarterback at Nebraska is not going to help me evaluate him as a wide receiver at Rice. I think maybe a little bit more back and forth with Tracy as a running back wide receiver because there's a little more overlap between those positions than there are, say, again, quarterback and wide receiver. But no, it's basically, okay, what did you do? And McCaffrey played 2 years at wide receiver. It's not like
yeah, that's the thing. Like, I have enough. I think I can make as confident an assessment as I can make, which is not very confident.
Yeah, and yeah, that's kind of, it's mostly a shrug, Alex. It's mostly I'm gonna evaluate what he put on tape, and if I think that's good, then we're gonna run with it. And if I don't, then I'm gonna avoid him and let somebody else take that landmine.
Yeah, Luke McCaffrey, here he is. Let's see. Yeah, he ran 29 routes a game at age 21 and 36 reps per game at age 22. 2 years is enough. I can at least make an assessment, if you know what I mean. 1.7 yards per route run, receiving yards per team pass attempt, then 2.3, which seems solid. But adjusted for the age he was playing and where he was playing, it wasn't particularly solid. I'm actually scanning across to his ADOT. I'm assuming it's high. Yeah, his slot rate was 70% in both. Actually reduces expectations somewhat. And his ADOT was 11 and 10. So yeah, his numbers are, especially where he was playing. Not particularly impressive, but solid. It is good to know the context for that kind of thing. Like when you're looking at Brian Thomas and his career numbers look like terrible, but then you dig into the years, you find, oh, you really only got 1 year to work with. The average is kind of spreading that goodness out too far. So let's just take that 1 year sample. And it's a fair point on McCaffrey that his career long numbers aren't going to look as good. But then you look at his final 2 years and like, that's literally the noise I would make. Not as terrible, but not overly impressive at the same time at the American Conference. So context matters, but that's why I start from the top, but I actually do try and work through the years. Like, where's that average coming from? Where's that career total coming from? Because you don't want to take 1 year as the truth. Travis May's peak production profile does. I don't find a way to get it to work for wide receiver specifically. Running back, yes. Tight end, yes. Wide receiver, I think the average works with context at least, whereas Travis May swears by peak production. So there is a way of just looking at their best year, which would mitigate some of these difficulties. But I don't know. I only know Travis has made that work for himself, and he's made it work really well. But he also spends like buku, like all the time processing college, and is very good at it. So, Toronto Dave, is it wrong that I never want to make a rookie pick and just trade them away because I think the risk with prospects is so heavily understated?
Toronto Dave is a plant for Tommy Blair, FF Tommy B. That's his entire strategy. But like, it's
solid. Yes. If you're getting value, you just got to realize you're always going to be giving up ceiling value.
That's the thing. So Dave, go try to trade one rookie pick right now for CeeDee Lamb, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, Patrick Mahomes, Jalen Hurts. Go try to trade one rookie pick for any of those, because you can't. Because the cheapest, and yes, it's volatile, and yes, the average is 50% of first round picks in fantasy football rookie drafts bust, which is why I advocate for identifying good classes before they're good classes, before everybody knows they're good classes, trading into them with multiple picks and taking multiple shots at the can in good classes to rebuild. That is how I have been successful. It's how I've rebuilt dynasty teams ad nauseum. I just actually tweeted yesterday or retweeted because something came up about signed with the Cowboys. The running back that signed with the Cowboys was a 2018. Anyway, there were like something came up about him because I made a tweet about, and so I searched back and found that 2018 rookie draft. And so I'd identified the 2017 class as being really good as a running back class, and the 2018 class as having a couple more, and Saquon. So I wanted to be in that class. And so I had 4 first-round picks. It was Royce Freeman. 4 first-round picks, and I ended up with Saquon, Chubb, Freeman, Sutton in that and Lamar Jackson in that class. Like, all of a sudden, that's a rebuild. Like, right there, like, my team went from being terrible to having 2 top running backs, a wide receiver who was a top 24 wide receiver for a couple of years, and one of the highest scoring quarterbacks. So, Dave, like, I don't think it's wrong. I think the idea of never wanting to make a pick is the right idea, but you're going to lose a ton of value. And if you do that the right way, if you identify a class the right way, you understand that you're going to have Royce Freeman. You understand that you're going to draft players who don't hit, but if you get enough shots at a can in a class that is objectively good, then you have a chance to really make some hay with your team. Rookie picks are replenishable assets. You get your rookie picks every year, right? So missing on them, and I talked a little bit about this at the beginning of the Dynasty Dummies episode that I just did, where I was on there by myself, but like, we think of losses the wrong way. So if you were thinking about
this thought, by the way, I thought that was good.
Yeah, so if you're thinking about it completely rationally, Dave, you're evaluating two states of wealth. You're evaluating where you are and then where you end up. So if you miss on a rookie pick, you stay stagnant. You don't lose anything, even though it feels like you did. You're still here. But what we do in prospect theory, so Daniel Kahneman is a behavioral economist. Well, he passed away last month, but Nobel Prize winning behavioral economist, and started realizing that people aren't rational, and what we actually think is gains and losses, and so we take that rookie miss as a loss, even though it's not. It's a net neutral. Like our team didn't get any better, but we didn't get any worse either. We just missed the pick. So I think that part of this is psychological. Part of it is you got to attack rookie drafts the right way, because otherwise it's a 50-50 proposition, or a little better if you get into the top end of the first round. But still, you're playing darts blindfolded in a hurricane.
Yeah, all that being said, let's actually do the thing that we don't do, because I spent so long trying to convince people that veterans and people that have proven it are worth more and more consistent. Whatever the Jacob Rickroad stat is, like 20 wide receivers account for like 70% of all top 12 seasons of the last 10 years, whatever his numbers are. All of that's true. I think once you get people to understand the edge, the next part is trying to make them, because we all want to go, I figured out Dynasty. The edge is small. So assuming you know that, and that's what this is about, and you're not actually a plant for Tommy, which, it's a good strategy. The first thing I want to say is you can play Dynasty successfully this way. I think it's solid. I think if everyone's running after youth, you should run after veterans. But what the part of Zach's point that I'm going to take is that means you can only get a good player every 3 years, because you have to use 3 years worth of draft picks to get a CeeDee Lamb or a Justin Jefferson or a Jamar Chase. Solid way of doing it, but then you're going to have to improve everything else to make up your team, right? Definitely a viable dynasty strategy. I'm not saying this is stupid, but don't think you're avoiding risk by avoiding rookie risk. What you're doing is avoiding a bigger risk by going for lesser risks with lower levels of payout, which is fine. I mean, you go into a casino, you play the games you want to play, just realize you're still in a casino. That's what I'm saying. So, go back to where I started from. Yes, 60% of wide receivers and running backs every year that finish inside the top 12 have been there before. Only 39 or 40%, depending if you're looking at running back or wide receiver and then what date ranges you're choosing, finished in the top 12 last year. Now, to put that into context, Dave, that means 4 players on a good year. Now, sometimes it's 8, sometimes it's 2. The average always kind of lies to us. But let's just say it's an average year. 4 players from the top 12 that you're going to go trade your 3 rookie picks to avoid risk for. Well, you're going to have to trade 3 or more, actually, for any of them. But how deep do you get before you find one that you can actually trade for, especially for a single rookie pick? Let's assume you say Jamar Chase is safe in the top 12 this year. He's going to repeat. CeeDee Lamb, Justin Jefferson, right? Puka Nacua breakout year. Cool. You sure you want Puka, not Tyreek Hill or Stefan Diggs or any of the other veterans that can definitely be one of those repeat rate guys? No? Okay, so we're going with Puka Nacua. All of the other 6 that you could trade for multiple firsts are going to miss. So you're not trading for no risk, you're trading for less risk, because all of those guys that might not make the top 12 this year are still going to be good. It's not like who missed last year. Devontae Adams, at the very end of his fantasy career, is suddenly bad or not viable in Dynasty because he didn't finish in the top 12 last year. That's a safety. That's how you're getting less risk. But you're not getting no risk, especially with Devontae Adams, whose trade value is almost gone, as someone was just pointing out, or even a Stephon Diggs, who I tried to be a year earlier, but this time last year, no one was mentioning is suddenly going to have an age problem when you go to trade him right now. And he is. And Tyreek Hill is going to have that problem next year. So 39% to 40% of players break out every year. Repeat every year. No, they also break out at that rate as well. So 60% are veterans that have been there or did it last year, been there before or did it last year. But the breakouts, it's about the same number of players. So you're trading out of that breakout class to go for the other 4 players because they have safer values. This is a good way of doing it, by the way. This goes to everything that we talk about, how veterans are more stable, they're more proven. Don't go for the mystery boat. Don't go for the mystery box when you have a boat, right? But the percentages are awfully close. 4 players break into the top 12 at running back and wide receiver in an average year. 4 players repeat from last year. So is there less risk with the veterans or the guys who've done it before? Yes. But the same number of players are going to break out in an average year as well. And the upside of that is you don't have to trade, like Zach was saying, 3 first-round picks or plus for CeeDee Lamb and Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase to get one of those 4 players you feel confident in, even though they could be one of the ones that don't repeat this year if you're looking for points, by the way. But also you're trading out of these single-round picks that can produce the same for you and have infinitely more value because they'll be shiny, sexy, and new. Now, the other part of that is, especially if you want to approach Dynasty this way, those breakouts, relatively rarely first-year players. That's just Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson, right? So they're just a tippy top. But you also have second and third-year players at the most likely top 12 breakout players. So if you're trading your picks away, you shouldn't just be going because you're not going to get CeeDee Lamb or Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase. You're going for breakout potential. And again, that should put it better into frame how you're not avoiding risk, you're taking a different kind of risk. Is it a slightly lesser risk? Yes, honestly, I think we can do better at breakouts than we can rookies. But also, it costs more, and it has just the same percentage chance of working out. So things to consider if you want to go down this route. You're not hyper meta braining it, rookies are too risky. You're taking about the same amount of risk with a more solid floor. It costs you more, and the upside of hitting is less. It's like, again, it's walking into a casino. You can play poker, probably going to lose your shirt, or you can play those penny slot machines. You're never going to lose your shirt, but the payout's less likely. You might leave with a little bit more than you came in on. You can develop a system for either one of them. All of this actually works as a pretty good metaphor for how to play Dynasty, actually, by the way. But you're just playing a different game in the same casino. The risk is still there. The upside is lower, the flooring's slightly higher. Or you can still crap out at both, to be fair. Zach, sorry, I've spoken for too long. I've got a whole table on this, by the way. It's neat stuff.
Well, and I think that's the thing that gets missed with all of this is, yes, we've run out this idea that rookies are infallible, and so there's a lot of risk baked into rookie picks, and the price of rookie picks isn't baking in that risk. Like, absolutely. But to Peter's point, it's similar on the other side of it, unless you have players who have, multiple top 24 seasons. And in order to acquire those players, generally you're having to pay multiple rookie picks. And by the time you do that, you've lost all your upside, mitigating the risk. So I don't know, Dave, that there is a right way to play it. I think, again, it's player by player, it's case by case, it's trade by trade, because if you can get into a player who's going to ostensibly continually produce top 24 seasons for a single rookie pick, you should do that. Like, that's a win. But if you're playing multiple rookie picks to get into a player who probably does, then all of a sudden you're mitigating the risk, but like Peter said, you're limiting the overall upside that you have, unless you're getting into Jefferson or Lamb or Chase, or, and then at that point, you're not getting in them for 2. It's 3 firsts or 4 firsts, or and so Dave asked if you could trade.
It's got to realize the paint by numbers are actually painting and run with it. Realize what you're giving up, but what you're getting in return, roll it out.
But Dave asked, he said the difference in ceiling has become so marginal that you could use that value to mitigate risk for future acquisitions. He says you could trade Marvin Harrison for Puka. How much potential ceiling difference are you even giving up? Well, so if Marvin Harrison is the best receiver, or the receiver that people think he is, if he's on that level of CeeDee Lamb, Justin Jefferson, AJ Brown, the difference between Puka and Nakua points per game and the top points per game is like 6 a week. So that's a That's a lot. So that, like,
Again,
there
Nick,
is a
I don't want to wave you off playing like this. It's
right.
really solid, but I think I want to put it in perspective for like the other comment that you had over here. Where was it? And I think this was a really good way of saying it. Is that you were all in on where was it? David Bell, me too, and Rondell Moore, me too. But these were second round picks, Dave. What do you mean by all in? Were you trading multiple first for them? No. Hopefully you were trading up a little bit, maybe in the second to get them. Right. That's not equivalent. Like missing on David Bell and Rashad Bateman until his value got escalated that rookie year. That's why it was bad, by the way. That's not the same thing as saying I'm avoiding risk in the rookie draft. That's you're not taking very reasonable shots at the second round. I would say the chances that Marvin Harrison Jr. and Malik Neighbors are going to be good are the same as Brandon Ayuk or Michael Pittman having a top 12 season. Like that's where you're not switching out of David Bell for Brandon Ayuk. You're not getting that. Maybe you do, in which case, take advantage of your trade partners at every opportunity. What you're doing is switching Neighbors and Marvin Harrison Jr. for Brandon Ayuk and Michael Pittman. Solid. Again, your floor's raised. Your ceiling is lowered, though, because if either of Neighbors or Marvin Harrison Jr. hit, so much better. You're not switching out David Bell and Rashad Bateman for or who's again? Rondell Moore, you said. You're switching out Neighbors and Harrison for those definitely top 20, more likely top 24, and maybe they could have top 12 again at one point or top 12 for the first time. Right. You're never getting the CeeDee Lamb and Justin Jefferson that way without somehow getting a trade that everyone on Twitter is like, yeah, I get those trades all the time. Well, maybe play in a fantasy football league, not with your fantasy baseball league friends. Maybe they'll know what they're doing then.
And the other piece of this, and this is why I evaluate so far before the NFL draft, and because I like to get an idea of where I value these players. So in this rookie class specifically, I think Brian Thomas and Xavier Worthy are going to be undervalued by the community, which means those are players that I can take shots on in the late first and be happy about without having to worry that I spent a premium pick on them. And if they hit, I'm a genius. Not really. I'm still a dummy, but like it was the same as hitting on AJ Brown, the same as hitting on Justin Jefferson. That's and to me, when I have a tier like this, and so Dave, I had Rondell Moore and Jamar Chase graded out the same in that rookie class. I did not end up with Rondell Moore if I had an early round pick. The two places that I had a top 3 pick, I took Jamar Chase because I could go get Rondell Moore at 201 or 202 unless I was in a league with Peter, and then he wouldn't trade me that pick, and he drafted him. And so like that's why when I talk about my rankings, that's not where you have to draft players, but that's where you can find value.
And this all fits. Hopefully, some of this fits together with what we're all saying here, Dave. Because it's like Tank Dell, Rashee Rice last year. Zach for Rashee Rice, although I like him all right, and Tank Dell for me. Like we're really happy. We're not trying to build our dynasty squads around the idea that it's normally David Bell. It's normally Rashad Bateman. It's when I get JSN and Corey Davis, I'm like, my first tier needs to be adjusted, man. I can't have those misses that high.
Yeah.
It's why trading back into JJ Arcega-Whiteside was a bad idea back in the day because I had my tiers messed up and I had him too high. Even though my ranks were actually, even though I still get made fun of, I had him below all the guys that hit. But I just liked the guy and I wanted to trade back for less risk, more value. And I like this guy. No, if one of my top tier guys falls down there or is down there, yeah, trade back. But
that's
if
where
it's just
tiers,
a guy you think fairly reasonable back there, that's an increased risk. That's why he's back there. So trading back into him was a stupid idea, Pete. I hate my past self and my present self and my future self. But I hopefully learned from that mistake. It wasn't that I was mega wrong on JJ Arcega-Whiteside. I think I was playing the rookie draft wrong, and I think my ranks were fairly accurate or fairly decent because they'd improved by that point. And hopefully have improved now. And it was about the way I was playing it. I want to take my risk in the rookie draft is literally about this conversation as well. I want to go up to Marvin Harrison Jr. and Neighbors. That's what I mean by that. I will take my risk on them instead of the breakout sleeper candidates. And I'm actually better at predicting than most, and I will still I'll take Neighbors because of that value. Give me that healthy value upside of when a Jamar Chase or Jefferson are hit, or a CeeDee Lamb in his third year. And AJ Brown's a good one to put in that conversation because I was a little more uncertain of him, but he was a higher tier than Bateman or Bell, or even for me, who was arguing with Jake at the time, and I love to draw Jake. I would have dropped AJ Brown further if I could have, but I wasn't stupid enough to because I was doing better at ranks by that point. And it all kind of fits together. Now, again, I want to make this clear because I want people to play different ways than me, although I'm happy to help my process improve your process. I think there's a viable way of playing this way, Dave. What Tommy is doing and what you're hoping or trying to do, and everything you're saying makes sense. It's just going to make sure you're getting your lines straightened up so that you know what you're playing for, so you know how to build your team. Again, you may be able to segue, instead of taking the risk on a Bell or a Bateman or a Tank Dell because they hit occasionally, you may be able to get a Rashee Rice. No, he's already elevating to the top 12 for some people this year. You may be able to get some second level breakout candidate. Who is that this year? Michael Wilson. They're not less risky, but there is a slightly safer floor in that we saw him have a fairly solid rookie season, and there is some small camp out there that's like, hey, Wilson's still on the depth chart. He did pretty well. Kyler Murray underperformed last year, but he's better than, and so on, and the narratives grow. But you're not changing David Bell out for Brandon Ayuk even. Definitely not the CeeDee Lamb, Justin Jefferson, or AJ Brown tier. You're trading them into the Michael, and that's probably a bad Michael Wilson tier. The second year, he'll have a finally top 24 season type tier. And so you got to get your line straight. And you're also cutting the top of that line off. The only way to get into there is, one, getting really lucky, which is, again, partly why we always say don't chase Puka Nacua. The idea you're going to get that level of upside with David Bell level risk or Rondale Moore level risk, pie in the sky. Like Tank Dell, Rashee Rice, really solid. I think we did really well with those two in that tier, in that range. And we know we're not going to hit it that often, although we think better than most because we're pretty arrogant about that. But also we've done it pretty consistently. Yeah. So all lines up, just make sure you're getting your own lines crossed straight for where you know the risks are coming from, what you're switching one risk out into another risk on, and realize that you're always cutting the ceiling to save your floor a little bit. And this isn't the same as a flex floor and ceiling that we're talking about. This is more value, but also points per game. But let's think of it as value. Very viable way of playing, Dave. Just make sure you're apples and applesing, right? A David Bell to a Michael Wilson, not a David Bell to a CeeDee Lamb on Iron Genius. That's just getting an unfair trade, which if you can do it, sure. Yeah. And I'll come back to all the other things that you said were right in a bit. But really good sparked a conversation between me and Zach a little bit. I let Zach talk now and again, Drew, I should just drop John Mitchie. Yeah. Sorry. Didn't quite work out.
Well, but that's exactly the type of player that you get in trouble with.
That's what I was going to say. It's also a good lesson. You can clog your roster with. I don't think it's wrong for you to roster a player that you like in that tier, but wide receivers like that are always the first to cut. They're always the biggest rostery cloggers, which is why we focus running back and tight end and say all that boring stuff about the later rounds, because wide receivers, throw them out for any random running back is probably a better option. So again, fits together with what we say normally. Mitchie, I didn't like a lot, but you were going to say why he's the type of player you avoid, though.
Well, no, I mean, like if you have a draft darling underperforming wide receiver that you're just hoping and like those are the types of players that you have to cut bait on. You're so much better off, Drew, rostering running backs, backup running backs, where if they play, you can start them and they'll get points. Then you are hoping that John Mechie ever becomes anything. And even if he does become something, he's still probably a wide receiver 3, which doesn't actually help you anyway. And so the idea of, like, I think you get stuck hoping. You get caught in the cycle of it's anchoring bias. it's you like John Mechie 2 years ago when he came out, and
the narratives always line up.
Yeah,
there's always a new OC or a reason he was bad
yeah.
last year. There's always a good reason. Yeah.
And with Mechie, the story where he had cancer and came back from it and he's back on the
you want
that's
him.
great.
I want him to succeed. Yeah.
Yeah. And so there's
always lines up.
which Drew is why I play so much of this game in the psychological avenue, because there's so much of this going on. And it's almost whenever I look at my roster and I look at the back, like almost 2/3 of my roster, I have that little voice in the back of my head, and I don't know who originally said it. I wish I remembered, but I've heard Stephen King quote it, where he says, "You have to kill your darlings." You have to go. And I can't remember who it was who originally wrote it. It's a brilliant thing, but like you have to go and look and detach, and you can't have that that emotional attachment to those players. You have to look at it and be rational and say, okay, the chances of John Mechie actually like cracking my lineup week to week and performing is not very good at this point. We're gonna jettison him because we have to make room for the next player that we're gonna do that same thing with. No, we're going to use this roster spot for running backs who have potential to win you a week any given week, even if overall they don't produce as many season-long points as Mechie.
William Faulkner.
Perfect. Faulkner. Brilliant.
Yeah, there's a movie with the time. It's used in everything, but I have a similar voice, so you got to fill up the rank. And Drew, you don't have to play like me. For God's sake, don't be like me. But take what you can from it, by all means. But the way we avoid that kind of thing isn't. I didn't like his profile, but Jameson Williams, solid profile actually. Several years out, perfect narratives. He, like I just mentioned earlier, he's on my sell relative to DLF ranks list because more narrative than proof, and the narratives always line up the way you want them to, especially if a player that's been injured. Who doesn't want to root for that? Or why wouldn't that make sense? It's not that it can't happen. I avoid Mitchies and so many other things just by realizing that most of it is narrative. And when you can make anything sound like it should happen, because we really can. There's enough of us out there making content and grinding and watching tape and running numbers that we can make anything sound like it should happen. The only way I found to avoid a lot of that stuff is just by stepping away from narratives. He's outside the breakout curve. He didn't have the college receiving yards per team pass attempt. If it happens, I'll change. Until then, let's enjoy listening to the stories. But my favorite stories have ghosts in them, not wide receiver injuries. Is how I used to say it. Jamari Thrash. Yeah, I'm a lot higher than consensus, but I was just looking him up. Oh, no, that was Franklin. Franklin's wide receiver 7 in DLF. I was like, oh, okay, so that's actually fairly respectful. I don't mind that. Thrash, however, is a little undervalued. I was again looking at my wide receivers, as I often do, my ranks, and comparing where they're coming from. There's this tier of wide receivers that are kind of above the fold, but it's mostly because of their role. I can see how my process works out now. So much better when I look at the overall numbers. But Franklin... Thrash is just below Franklin, which is just below Brian Thomas Jr. in my overall model. I didn't find a reason to drag him down because of his high A-dot role, but I still think he's less likely to produce multiple and consistent volume-wise level fantasy seasons because of the role he succeeded in college. He succeeded in it well enough. He doesn't deserve to be brought low like Roman Wilson or Keon Coleman or Brandon Rice, who are pushed outside the top 12 at least. But he is operating on that high A-dot low slot role, which is limiting in terms of fantasy hit rates, fantasy success, and longevity as well. So I like Thrash a lot. He's ranked relatively high, but the players under him, outside of having poorer college profiles, my model didn't recognize, like the ones I just mentioned, Adunze and Worthy immediately jump him despite him being higher in my model. Say their roles and how they were successful in college, better hit rates, more likely consistent multiple year success if they succeed as well. So Thresh is great and grades well in my model, and he will in all models because he's running a high A.dot role. He ran that high A.dot role so successfully, he's deserving of his relatively high rank. But you've also got to remember that second part. Then unless you have serious, very unique upside, like a Marvin Harrison Jr., like Tez Walker is in that mix just below Thresh. And I like him a little bit more because there's mystery and he's valued less by the community because of it, because of the college career he took and missed time. You kind of just have to plus and come out to this place where Thresh is definitely good. Possibly more limiting in fantasy. We'll have to see what the NFL thinks. And even then, like, you're hoping for one of those players that is more of a flex on a wide receiver too. If that makes sense. That's where I'm on at Thresh. Like, I like him a lot. Ranked high, I think his model scores are justified. But the role he's playing in college is a concern for a very different reason that Worthy's role was.
He was such
words. I'm running on tonight.
He was such a weird evaluation for me because Thresh is very skilled getting off press at the line of scrimmage. He's very good at sinking his hips and creating sudden changes of direction. So he's good like straight line, hitch or curl or comeback. He can be death by 1,000 cuts. Like, he doesn't necessarily always make big plays, but he's always making the play. And he's also really good at identifying and attacking off coverage. So, like, if instead of being pressed, he's got a free release, like, he's really good at that, really good at figuring out leverage. But Peter, the thing that drives me nuts about Thresh, and the thing that makes you and I see him differently, is he's a great deep threat, which is something that you are seeing with that A.dot. He is terrible at the catch point. So he has to create separation. He has to create separation and continue separation and rely on the quarterback to be able to throw the ball out where he can get it. Otherwise, he is going to lose that catch. He's also not really dynamic post catch. So, like, even if he gets the ball out in front and he doesn't add yards after the catch, so he's not making chunk plays.
6.3 per reception,
yeah, right. and I think in over the middle, I think he struggles too, where he's in trap. So, like, he's not like this big physical catch point player, but he's a down the field guy. So he's like this. I mean, he basically is a version of, and you mentioned Troy Franklin, but he's like a version of Troy Franklin, except I think Troy Franklin is a little better, better at the catch point, and he's so much smaller. And it's like, what? I don't know. It's and like I have Thresh in my, so my tier 4 is like 73 wide receivers in this class. It's really like 8 guys, and he's in that set of 8 guys. But you're just like looking at this, and I said this to J Mike, because usually I have like maybe a wide receiver who's in the 80s, and then I'll have like 2 or 3 who are in the 70s, and then it's just like, yeah, I'm not really interested in these guys. Somebody's going to hit, but I can't. They're 60 and below, 70 and below. This class, the 70s go 13 guys deep. I don't even know what to do in this class.
It's a point like Ricky Pearsall. I don't know how to say that name. Is in the next tier, like below Thresh and Franklin for me. But if he gets, like, the real reason is draft capital. Like, what's the NFL going to think? But he played in the slot so much more that if he gets similar draft capital, he's interesting. He's more interesting than Thresh or Franklin.
You can see volume
because they're so outside. Yeah, it's a fun game. Fun game.
This is an exact science. We get this dialed in. Don't worry about it.
Oh yeah, we got this. I got numbers and a calculator. It's scientific. Don't worry. It's not me going. Maybe if I just. It's like doing a jigsaw puzzle, but when the pieces don't fit, you just tap lightly, and everyone that's really bad at it bangs them in. But we're still willing to tap a little bit. Just it fits if we just jostle it a little bit. Like, that's the reasonable process. Zach Harris. Great profile picture, my man. 12-team Dynasty Superflex start 11. PPR start 2 tight end premium. Stroud, Herbert, Purdy, Wilson, Puka, Olave. Sorry, before I go on. The other thing about Thrash is if he gets drafted, does pretty well, I need a player to come into the league called Tango because I want Tango and Thrash. You see what I'm going for there? Tango and Thrash?
You could get Mingo.
No? That's been in the back of my head ever since I saw his name. I'm like, wouldn't it be great if Thrash was a successful wide receiver?
You could,
get
go Mingo and Thrash. That's kind of like Tango and Cash.
Mingo and Thrash were, yeah, but Mingo's never going to do shit.
It'd be like the Temu version of Tango and Cash.
Okay, Zach Harris, you've got a great team, my man. Nico McBride, JSN, I missed. Cole Kmet, trash can running backs.
That's Peter usually rosters trash can. That's nice. Oh,
I usually get usually my third round pick. 104, 107. Offer for JJ for Stroud straight. Superflex start 11. I think JJ is going to be higher, but you're in the tier at that point. You know what I mean? Stroud, especially right now, Stroud's value is so elevated. You almost feel like you could get more from a trade from Stroud, which is crazy insane. I think if I have JJ, I'm pretty happy to just keep having JJ. Like you said, your problem on this team is
he's got Stroud.
It's got nothing to do. Yeah, he'll be sending Stroud for JJ.
Yeah.
But you don't need the wide receiver. I mean, who doesn't need JJ? Pete, shut up. No. I think you can do better. Stroud's value right now is astronomical. It should be pretty good. Right now, it's slightly over. It's out kicking its coverage. I think I'd be more interested in seeing what I could do with Puka to try and add if you're trying to improve this team.
So if you're gonna trade Stroud, I would try to trade Stroud for Kyler Murray and then a pick, or Kyler Murray and a player, because I think you don't lose the production. I would rather start Stroud and Herbert or Murray and Herbert than I would start Purdy and Herbert, even with Justin Jefferson in my lineup.
I keep reversing it in my head. You're trading away Jefferson, and I'm trying to back up a minute. I think you're right. This makes you QB position.
Yeah,
that's what I mean. I'm trying to get it right. I think it weakens the QB position significantly, really significantly, to improve at a position you're already dominant at. I don't like it theory-wise. I love getting Jefferson for that, though. Stroud's value is great, but I just don't think you can do that to QB in a super flex. No. I don't think I could, which is awkward. So I want Jefferson. Like I say, Puka stands out to me. I'd rather see what I could do with Puka for JJ, just because I prefer JJ and they're about in the same tier right
now. And the other nice thing too is you look at the 104 and the 107. You're adding either Bowers, Neighbors, or a quarterback.
Not a QB.
I mean, you might.
Quarterback. You might. I don't see if I felt stronger about the 4 for quarterback, I might feel more okay with this. But the 4, I don't think you're getting. I don't think you're easily getting back to Stroud, Herbert as your QBs. Not easily with the 4.
Right.
That level of strength. You know what I mean? You're ending up with a May. And like you said, he's at least going to start slow.
Yeah.
Sorry. I don't mean to.
No, but that's what I would do. Like, I would either hang on to Stroud or I would shop Stroud and try to get Kyler plus to get to plus for Stroud. And if you do that, you may be able to get Kyler and a running back and be happy about it.
I tell you, I was really hoping to move on from Kyler. Kyler's been my number one buy in Superflex Dynasty for like 2 years. He still pretty much is.
They won't let you.
Herbert's the only other guy right now that's in contention, and you've got him. So, no. Yeah, I think I want Jefferson, but I don't think I would do that. especially in a super flex, you're weakening the most important position for an important position, maybe the second most important position. But you're already Wilson, Puka, Olave, like even Nico now. Pretty solid. And you can add to that position this year with a 7. Like the 7's a great wide receiver pick in this year's class. Speaking of that tier that we were talking about. Anyway, interesting trade, though, Zach. Drew, tight end Saunders was a 5-star recruit. I've heard that. Thoughts on him being a sneaky pickup? He's like the consensus.
He should be the
tight end 2 right now, I think. So I don't know you're getting him sleeper wise, but he's going to go a lot further behind than Bowers. But there's a pretty decent reason for that. Like Sanders would be the QB1 in a class where we don't really draft tight ends in the first round, which is about where he's going. So it feels like you're getting a value, but I actually think it's just fair. Like Sanders is a really good prospect. You probably shouldn't spend a first round pick on a tight end, maybe late first, max. And this year, no. So yeah, I think Sanders is fine. I don't know he's sneaky, but tell yourself whatever you have to tell yourself. If Sanders is going in a reasonable range, take him where he comes to you. Around about where ADP has him. Again, the draft's going to shake that shit up so much. But what was I just looking at? Sanders. Go away. Not you.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, Sanders is falling into like pick in DLF ADP. He's pick 26, which puts him into the early third. Which is a bit of a steal for what would be a tight end 1 in most classes. But that's mainly because Ladd McConkey and Adonai Mitchell, and there's all these mistakes people are going to clear up before rookie drafts actually take place. Roman Wilson, all ahead of him, probably. I don't think he's an arbitrage play on Bowers, and that seems to be what you're going for. Like Bowers is a very different. He rightly is worth twice as much, if you know what I mean. But Sanders is going to be a really good pickup if you get him where in mid-second, late second. I'd be happy with that too. Zach Harris, 12-team Dynasty, Superflex, start 13, PPR, start 2, tight end premium. Productive struggle year 1. Would you give the 107, the 207, and a projected early 25 first? Projection doesn't mean a lot to me, but it's good to know. The team's second lowest scoring via Dynasty Daddy. Dynasty Daddy is a really cool website / app. I actually kind of like it. It provides simple answers to complex problems, so you got to realize there's a problem with that. But it's interesting look. What did it give the 107 for the 207 and 25 first? I don't mind trading out of the mid first for another first plus a second. I actually think that's relatively solid. This year, I think the top 7 in this year's class are stronger than most, so I'm not hyper excited for it. What I'm probably going to say is you don't have to do that right now. You could wait till after the draft. You could wait till you're on the clock, and that trade should still be available, and you'll know more about what's available to you. I think in general, really good value. Building value is always a good thing. But where I'm at the end of my rookie process at this point, I feel pretty confident the top 7 picks are a little different than most years. Like a little bit more valuable. That 7 picks are a little bit more valuable than usual. So I'm not hyper excited to do it. But if you did it, it's fine. Or do it. But I'd play the timeline out as much as I could to get as much information as possible. If it was last year, I'd say the 7, yeah, sure. Most years, yes. But this year, the top 7 are a pretty solid group. Zach, do you think that's just fair? Is this 7 just before or after your tier where you'd be hesitant?
I think so. Again, I think you've got the 2 quarterbacks. I think you've got the 2 wide receivers. So now we're at 4. Yep. You got Bowers, and then you're at that like group of wide receivers that we like. Yep. So I'd probably, again, I think you can get more for the 107, or at least this, like you said, on the clock, and you could kind of see what's going on. I don't necessarily think that, Zach, every draft class is created equal. And I think that this draft class is really deep in the first round. There are some really high-end players, at multiple positions, at quarterback, at tight end, at wide receiver, and we don't see that every single year. And so even that projected early first next year may not get you into a range where you're as excited about what you are looking at as you are this year at the 107. So again, I would hang on, I would wait, I would see what's on the clock before I made that trade.
Yeah, and I don't think, like, I can't think of a single reason why you shouldn't be able to, except for the fact they're probably going to go make another trade. Like, that trade should be available to you on the clock with someone else, if not that exact person. So I wouldn't feel pressured. Heck yeah, Eric All. Tyron Tracy isn't the next David Johnson, but he's freaky fun player. Oh, good to know. Thanks. Boiler up.
And that's Travis too.
Oh, that's Travis. So that's actually from. There you go.
Yeah. So listen to that. I do.
Do you have a scouting
Peter Howard
on Peter Howard's wide receiver profile? All right.
Really good inside the numbers, but once he gets outside of that, he gets boxed in a little bit. You know.
I don't know what that means, so I'll take it as a compliment. Hi guys, 12-team half-point PPR contender. Send Swift, keep for Cup.
Yes.
Running back to wide receiver is the only thing that makes me hesitate. Running backs are a little harder to come up with Swift level upside. But yeah, Cup, man, yeah. Swift is pretty cool.
I would.
Corn on the cob 3 times in a row. I like it. Or some kind of ice cream and a green card. I'm not sure. Appreciate the shout out, by the way. Every week, man, and you turn up this once to appreciate it. No, I appreciate it. Everyone go follow Travis, even though I'm pretty sure he's not allowed to do most of the stuff for fantasy anymore. On account of he actually got a significant job where there are like trade secrets at this point. But still, follow Travis. He's pretty cool. And when he does give out information, it usually tends to be on point and on fire.
Yeah, he's good.
Toronto Dave, I'm cool giving up the marginal ceiling premium. Yeah, I mean, you should be. You just have to. There are many different viable ways of playing in fantasy. Zach plays different than me, and we're both doing fine. And most people in our leagues are playing slightly differently, and they all do pretty good for themselves as well, often beating us. Like, again, when I emphasize, I'm not telling you not to play that way. You just got to appreciate the game you're playing. I actually think it's great because you're giving yourself a formula. And if you line it up right, you know what you're doing when you're trying to do it. You know when it goes wrong and when it goes right. It's not just about the results. And that gives you a process to follow. I actually like a lot of the idea behind it. Just, nail it down. Better than even I just did for you. But I do see a few holes in the way you're reasoning. Again, it's not David Bell to that higher tier. But if you can do it across and still see, and then you'll see the viable way of succeeding at it, solid. It's a really good idea. Yeah. Tim Shady, some people play for running back, geez, and they do pretty well at it. Tim Shady, what makes Brian Thomas Jr. a better prospect than Terrence Marshall?
Skill.
There's a lot there. Talent. No, okay. Did Brian Thomas Jr.'s numbers just pop better than when he got his shot? All right, I can do some of this because I actually, for this podcast, I saved my database in like a non-active version, like much what I have uploaded to you, so they can actually look at it a little bit, not a lot, but a little bit without crashing the entire stream. Hopefully that's noticeable somewhere where I've been able to say things about the numbers instead of my memory of the numbers. All right, let me... Off the top of my head, Terrence Marshall's profile main problem was that I hate to keep going back to the same words, but it was ass. He wasn't a very significantly high volume / result of volume receiver. I know lots of people convinced lots of people that wasn't true, but, just know that they were wrong and they should have known they were wrong. But if you dug into Terrence Marshall, which people did to find the reason to hype him up and then mislead everyone to what his profile was. I really do think it was a mislead, by the way, but the NFL fell for it, so maybe not. The results don't actually mirror what is true, but I like standing on them a little bit. There were 3 games, which is actually where it comes from, that Terrence Marshall in his final season had astronomical results. Now, I'm not going to tell you the competition was different, blah, 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 blah. I think he did phenomenally well in these 3 games. So when you per gamed that last season, it looked a lot better than his entire college profile. There's some parallels to Brian Thomas Jr. that we can come back to here, which is what makes this viable. And before that, Terrence Marshall was playing with a plethora of other good wide receivers. So the idea was this was the truth on if you per game it, and that's where the root cause of the hype comes from. Now, there are a few problems with that. Per game doesn't work if you're using it specifically to come to a conclusion that you want to come to. It's a reasonable way of looking at a player if they suffered injuries and so you're trying to get some idea. Like Adam Harstad, I happen to know, will take what they did and then add the average on for an average number of attempts to try and come to a fair assessment. That's just, I think, a fair way of mitigating the difficulty of a small sample, but it doesn't actually tell you more of what they would have done. It just slows the hype down a little bit, which is a fair way of doing it. Instead, what I choose to do is ignore seasons that don't have significant sample, unless that's all you have, and then you have to kind of run with it, check out what the film thinks, check out what the NFL thinks, and again, try and do that jiggling the jigsaw piece into place, but you know you don't have an accurate fit. Difference with Brian Thomas Jr., who did play with multiple stars, I think Addison, right? And a few others who were the wide receiver ones on a team ahead of him, and then did come to his own last year. His numbers don't look good only on a per game basis based on three games where he had these astronomical results before getting injured. So the main difference is they're different players. They're different people entirely. We should always remember that people aren't other people, even if the numbers are the same. I do want to clarify that. That's why it's important to listen to Zach and people that actually break down the film with a decent process, because no one is the same, even if they play it exactly the same and have the same numbers. Outside of that, from an analytics perspective, Terrence Marshall's profile looks good because he had 3 good games, got injured, and then people per-gamed it and just kind of argued away the fact that that was bad. Even when they said that was bad, they still kept on with it, but it was really frustrating. Brian Thomas didn't have a shortened season that only looks good if you per-game it. He had a great final season. That's not the same as Marvin Harrison Jr. and Mike Neighbors, who did it for multiple years without any questions, which is why he's in a separate tier. But he did have a great final season, especially when you age adjust it. So the fact it's a later breakout isn't as concerning to me that someone does age production or the age of the player instead of just age adjusted. That final season just looks like a great season that offers more upside in his range of outcomes. So that's a principal difference. He didn't have a good final season if you per game it, and it all basically comes down to 3 games of production. He just had a great final season. Are there some similarities there? Yes, I actually get where your comparison's coming from there. But Brian Thomas is the way you go looking for a later career breakout, I think, that just had a better end to his career than he did start. Terrence Marshall is how you make a player look like he had a better end career at the end last final season than he had for the rest of his career. I think that last season was a lie because he was injured, so people per-gamed it in order to make the argument. Brian Thomas Jr. doesn't have that fault in it. Might he still fail for fantasy? Sure. But I don't think he's the same prospect profile. Zach, you say words now.
Well, no, like one of the really quick, easy ways.
Just if we just take their entire college career, ignoring all these per game, just all their routes, all their snaps, their entire college career. Brian Thomas Jr. had more receiving yards per team pass attempt for his entire college career than Terrence Marshall. So just on a complete career basis, he's actually a better prospect. But yeah, Karen.
No, and I think that's kind of part of, maybe not exactly, but part of what pops to me about the difference between those two players is when I watch film, I don't care about touchdowns. And Terrace Marshall's film was really dependent on touchdowns. And Brian Thomas scored 15 touchdowns, and it doesn't matter that he scored 15 touchdowns because his film was good, like regardless of the 15 touchdowns this past season. And I think to me, that's the simple difference is, and I think a lot of people get caught up on, and even when you do dominator rating, because so much of that is based on touchdowns, is you get caught in players who score and then you bucket them together. And there are some players who just score as a byproduct of being good, and there are some players who score because they specifically do things geared towards scoring touchdowns, and that's what and that was really
can be a skill.
Yeah, but it's the least translatable skill to the next level, and it's the least sticky year to year. And so, like, if I'm going to bet on something, I'm going to bet on a guy who is a good player who also scores touchdowns rather than a guy who is good at scoring touchdowns. If that makes sense.
Another way of running through it. Age 19, Brian Thomas Jr. ran 20.5 routes per game or something. Only got 0.75 receiving yards per team pass attempt. Or I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to do yards per route run because it's a number you're all more familiar with. 20 routes per game, 1.3 yards per route run. Not great, right? Age 19, Terrence Marshall, 35 routes per game. More. Better. Ran a 1.59 yards per route run. Better number. But are you excited about a 1.5 yards per route run? No, it's mediocre, right? So Brian Thomas did bad, and Terrace Marshall, I'm trying to get the name right, I swear to God, did kind of bad, but he did better than Brian Thomas Jr. Following year, age 20, that's when Terrence Marshall only plays 7 games, right? I actually don't know his yards per route run off the top of these numbers because I just discount the season, but I do know he performed lower than 2 yards per route run that year because he did that in receiving yards per team pass attempt. And he only played 7 games. The following year for Brian Thomas, he ran 34 routes per game, what Terrence Marshall was doing at age 20, and he ran at 2.6 yards per route run. So when Thomas actually earned the volume, the idea that the best wide receivers around him left, and he got the job, right? He ran a 2.6 yards per route run, which is actually a really good number relative to his ADOT, relative to where he was playing in terms of the slot as well. When Terrence Marshall was running 35 routes per game, he's running a 1.5 yards per route run. Apples to apples, ignoring a per game argument in that final season, Brian Thomas Jr. always did better. Or if you like, the story that Brian Thomas was held back, I don't think that's how it works, but let's use it, by the better receivers actually adds up. Terrence Marshall's story of being held back by other good wide receivers before that final year, or that second year, in the case of 35 reps per game, doesn't add up. So Brian Thomas Jr. may fail or succeed for fantasy, but the story makes sense and the production is there. I can't say this enough. Terrace Marshall was always a fiction. Like, I hate saying this about a whole ass person who's much better at something than I will be at anything, because he was a good college player, don't get me wrong, and he could have succeeded in the NFL. The results might actually just be confirmation biasing what I think. But every time I come back to look at Terrence Marshall's profile, I'm like, you have to lie to yourself to see better than average in any of the seasons he played. You have to per game that final season, ignore that basically you're paying attention to 3 games in a college career that spanned 28 games and saying those 3 games are the truth. And that, I don't see any way you get there if you're not making content, trying to make clicks, justify a first round pick, or find a sleeper. I don't see any way of getting to where Terrence Marshall profile is above average, let alone good. That's also partly the difference. Thomas's needs explanation. It isn't top tier Sterling, but that last year's really significant, and the story for how his college career played out that way makes sense. Terrence Marshall's doesn't. And then I listened to someone like Zach saying Thomas is doing pretty well on tape, and when you listen to Zach that year about Marshall, it was like, yeah. He didn't make those noises because he's a more regular human that makes points with words, but that's kind of the vibe I got. I actually remember that year because I was nervous because I was arguing against like some serious freaking people, and not that it matters, no one's paying attention to me, but I still get nervous for me. And someone comped into DK Metcalf, who also missed a lot of time, which is where these comps often come from. And I actually got in Jake's DMs. He's the guy I used to have a podcast with. He got DK Metcalf right. I was dubious because of the missed time in the sample. And I was like, is there any truth to this? Like, am I missing on Marshall the way I missed on DK Metcalf? And Jake couldn't stop laughing. I was like, okay, I'm safe. I'm pretty good. Like, he literally had to take time away from the computer to stop laughing. It's like, no, he doesn't. He's no, not Metcalf. He's not hiding that profile in those 7 games. Again, he played 28 games. He should have showed up before that final year per game, 3-game sample. Ideally, and at least it did for Marshall. Now, if Marshall had, Thomas had only played 7 games that final season, he would look like the same prospect probably as Marshall did, because I wouldn't per game that last season. Again, I'm always blessed. We're always blessed with more sample, and if we don't get enough, I mean, we just don't get enough. It's important to remember I don't know, or numbers don't know. And again, DK Metcalf is a good, and AJ Brown's good for that as well. Even Brandon Ayuk, and who's the other guy I used? Jalen Waddle. Like, if I don't have enough sample, I just have to know I can't know. Like, with Waddle and Brandon Ayuk, they have one good year, one bad year. It's really hard to make a call when you just don't have any other games. With DK Metcalf and AJ Brown, they both missed odd half a seasons here and there. You just can't make a full decision. You just can't make a full profile with that. Per game here is always dangerous. But those are lots of the differences, I guess. The difference in ceiling has become so marginal nowadays, and you could use that value to mitigate risk of further acquisitions. You mitigate it, you don't eliminate it. And you lower the ceiling, but you do raise the floor a little bit, or you can raise the floor a little bit more consistent. Yeah. Yeah, you get it. You get it.
Yeah.
Again, I do this to myself when I find a new way of playing or new element to add to my game. You run to the best case, but then you try and roll yourself back in, because otherwise the practical decisions you're gonna make aren't gonna be the best. You know, that's what I think I can help with this one. That's why I was excited. It's like, oh, I know things about that. Yeah, exactly. Different bucket, still same bucket. You're still playing buckets. And those are more in jest, but also a fair point. Yeah. I actually think it's the point. I know you weren't literally one-to-oneing, but in my head, that's where I go. Like, think of the Corey Davises, think of the N'Keal Harrys. But, like, even though I'm strongly missed on both, I wasn't as high on either. I was relative to the draft class, but intra-class, neither had as high a profile as Jefferson or CeeDee Lamb or Jamar Chase, Marvin Harrison Jr., Neighbors. All of them intra-class were higher, which is, again, why I'm trying to become better at intra-classing my tiers so I can see that more clearly. And if I'm actually getting that right. Yeah. Play it. I mean, you've got so many leagues, Dave. There's no harm in at least trying it in some of them, or try it in all of them. And you can always reverse at some point. Like, I don't want to discourage anyone from playing a new way, especially a way that not everyone's playing. There's always going to be a slight edge in that. Yeah, run with it. See how you do. Come back. Tell us how wrong we are. Or right. Or whatever. Tell us how it goes. I think I'm getting better grasp now of what you guys are saying. Thank you, Dave. Thanks for listening. And talking. 1 QB, non-PPR, Chase for ETN, the 107, and Reed. It's Chase. Yeah.
Sorry. I'm not sorry.
It's just how do I say this? We normally say quarters aren't the same as 4 quarters aren't the same as $1 kind of a thing, but this more feels like $10 aren't the same as a $10 note because it takes up less room. There are extra advantages to having the larger note. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. Because those aren't quarters. Those are pretty nice things. But
yeah.
Chase is just better. I think I found a really good balance using your thoughts to help with my strategy. Hopefully that's how it works. Again, I can't say it enough. Never just take the things I say and go, oh, that's how it. No.
Yeah.
No one needs to be more like me. But hopefully as a sounding board, yeah.
Yeah. Thesis, antithesis, synthesis. And then you've got something.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you're going about it in an interesting way, Dave. I would keep going.
Yeah.
And again, reading. So not always trade my picks, hopefully acquire multiple. Yeah, at some point you're going to have more than just your pick. So acquiring picks isn't the same thing as avoiding making picks. I think that's an important element to what you're trying to do. Yeah.
And the other part of that, Dave, is not, again, and I can't stress this enough, not every draft class is created equally. So having multiple first round picks in, say, this draft class
This year,
is nice, as opposed to having multiple first round picks in, say, 2019, not
not
as
so nice.
nice. Yeah.
Still make, and you can still make some picks if you choose,
Yeah.
but I mean, me being me, I would try and alter it because there is a way of playing when you never make a pick. Like you just sit on the clock. I will time out or someone's trading me. I mean, you could go that far, I guess. But there's almost always someone that will trade you. Even if it's just for a pick next year. You know? Thank you guys for your input. No problem, Alan. I didn't know you. Have we spoken to you tonight? Probably input on other things. We always like seeing you.
Alan's always in. Yeah, I enjoy interactions with Alan.
Me too. But acquiring multiple firsts is where the trouble comes in. I don't know.
But again,
I think your strategy would require you build up picks still to trade them. Because, like I said, otherwise you just trade 3 years at a time. Like, here's 3 picks, I'll take a player. 3 years later, here's 3 picks, I'll take a player. And that's going to be slow, too slow.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, but again, not every player you draft and not every player you acquire is going to be a wide receiver. And so, again, Dave, then this is perfect world, perfect league. What I try to do is draft that running back, play him for 2 years, 3 at the very outset, but usually 2. Trade that running back for a young proven wide receiver and a pick. And then when I get to a point where I'm identifying a draft class where I want to like really reload, then I try to get as many first round picks as I can. But that's how I'm cycling through, because that young proven wide receiver now is part of my stable of wide receivers. That pick can be another running back to restart that cycle, or depending on what's available. I mean, you're never looking at a class going, I am going to take a running back with pick X. You're going to take the best player that's there, but you can identify classes that the running backs are the top of the class.
If I could line out, which I can't at this point, I say way too many words, my process, and line it up to the part of your process that you're talking about. I think I actually play it differently, talking about playing differently. I'm more interested in older running backs almost constantly. And there isn't a one-to-one. Like, I'm not just trying to hit on wide receivers in the draft to trade into older running backs, but it's more that than what you're doing, if you know what I mean. Like, I'll take a Bijan Robinson or Jamal. I'm just trying to hit in the rookie draft is the ultimate story. But I try to acquire my running back. Part of my running back strategy, or the part that lines up with yours, is instead of trying to do that whole trade thing to get out of him, I'm more trying to use volume of accrued through success or lower picks to try and get the Austin Eckler's, the CMCs.
Well,
not so
but
much CMC. He's never fallen. Barkley's. I'm always kind of going for the older class of running backs rather than trying to get out of the younger ones. Not that you wouldn't do that either, but like that's
For me, that's when I am getting, like, if I'm ready to compete, that's when I'm loading up on those running backs because they don't cost anything. They're cheap. They're old. And you just, so then it's a points play, and you're like, oh, well, I'll give you my second for Eckler, and I'll give you, my year out first for Barkley. And now all of a sudden you've got the young running back, you've got the 2 veteran running backs, you've got your young wide receiver core that you've built up. And if you played scattershot tight end, maybe you ran into Trey McBride or you ran into Laporta. And so now all of a sudden your team is a bunch of hammers. It's a bull of the woods, as opposed to like trying to rebuild on the fly and not have a strategy. Like, my strategy is I'm putting pieces in place. It's almost like playing Tetris, where like I'm trying to get the pieces in place. So then all of a sudden I can go, all right, I need that straight piece that comes here, and I clear the board. I can add those running backs, the veteran running backs, as my last piece and clear the board, because those are the easiest things to acquire, are those older running backs who still produce. because
Yeah.
the shelf life. Oh, we got the age cliff. Running backs are dead. Derrick Henry's still going to have a great year this year. Saquon Barkley should have a great year with the Eagles this year. Eckler should have a great, like, we're still at a place where like those running backs are viable, even though the acquisition cost is nothing.
Yeah, and mine tends to shift with trend. Like right now, running backs are in that state, but in a couple years, I think all the good ones are going to be young again, and then it's different. So mine shifts a little bit. But I think to your Tetris metaphor, like we've both gotten to the point where we can play Dynasty like Tetris, but I'm trying to put the shapes in a different. Like I'm trying to put the straight pieces on the edges, and you're looking to build that central missing piece, and then So it's like same thing but different, and that's why I was trying to line it up. It's the same game, but
there's
a
lot of different ways to skin a dynasty.
Yeah, but do remember, Tetris will know it is Tetris in a casino. I like the casino metaphor quite a lot right now.
Do we still get the music?
All of it exists in a casino. Usually, yeah, definitely. Let's get that track in here. I never finished that movie about the. I started it on Hulu about Tetris and how it was invented. I started watching. I was like, "This will be cool." I'm a nerd, and I got bored so quick. For some reason, I like the Russia parts. I was like, "Cool, look right." Then I got real bored and just gave up. It was about marketing and businesses and companies, and I was like, "I don't give a fuck."
I used to have a game that was 4-sided Tetris. It was called Weltris, so it was like Tetris but down a well.
Oh wow!
Oh, it was wild.
I would suck at that.
That's Pearsall. Pearsall over the get.
Pretty easy. There was a test when I was interested in the armed forces and the Air Force. Like the Air Force put you through tests to find out what job you're going to do. You're not applying to be a pilot. And so we were doing some, and one of them's to test whether you could be an air traffic controller, and that's what that game makes me sound like. So you got to pay attention to colors and shapes in like a 3-dimension space, and so it's like control red 4, and there's a red 3 over here and a red 2 over there, and you have to be able to pay attention. Or I sucked at it. I was like, air traffic controlling is not my 3-dimensional thinking is not my bag. That could sell a moldy cheese sandwich. Love his player assessments.
But it's Camembert. I mean, it's all good.
Moldy cheese is the good cheese, right? KC Troller, to branch off the low talk earlier, which of the receiving backs, if any, are good blockers? That's a you.
So I already mentioned Kamani Vidal. I think Kamani Vidal is a pretty good blocker. I think Cody Schrader is a good blocker, which is he's out of Missouri by way of Truman State. And that, I mean, that's pretty much like a lot of pass catching running backs don't, especially in college, don't get asked to run block very often or pass block very often because they're going out on routes, where I think there's a lot more of that asked in the pros. I think Blake Corum is a very good blocker, although I think he's a little less than he's not really a receiving back. He's like the really Devin Singletary-ish in terms of like the way he plays. They're not the same player, but like he's a smaller back who can run inside, who runs for chunk plays. But you look at him and you're like, oh, he should be a space back and he should be running outside and they should be throwing him the ball a ton. And that's not what he does. Like he can, but he's a pretty good blocker too. So like there are a few, but not a ton of really good pass blockers.
All right. I looked at example trade Marvin for Pittman and 25 first. Yeah. But if Marvin Harrison, again, same metaphor, like Marvin Harrison Jr. should be Jefferson, should be Chase, should be CD Lamb at least.
Yeah.
Already worth more than that package, but you're a little more safer with the package. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, but I don't want to. Yeah, I don't want to break my Harrison into.
Yeah.
Or yeah, I don't want to do that.
Yeah, but I think that's what Dave's way he's thinking playing this way. It's kind of what it would require. So
Right.
you would be interested in it, Dave. Yeah. Yeah. 25 draft class is bad, right? It's going to be better for running backs, few interesting quarterbacks. I'm not a Devy guy, but I do listen a little bit. Again, Travis May, he's already talking about the best players in two draft classes' time. He'll already be dialed in on 25. Just follow his timeline, like, literally. That's what you have to do. But what I've gathered from the Campus Canton, Zach's going to have a great name for you in a second. I always forget to mention him, but he's freaking awesome at this.
Oh, Felix Sharp? Yes.
There you go. You always mention him, and it's always worthy.
Felix is great.
Yeah. So yeah, that's what I know about running back. About 25, it's going to be a little more better for running backs. Quarterback's going to be fairly interesting. You're probably not going to have a Brock Bowers, to be fair, because that's fairly rare. Wide receivers are going to be a little less. So bad is relative, but you're going to have less depth. Like the top 7 this year worth more this year than most years, and it's going to be worth more than next year's top 7. Yeah.
And Shane Hallam is another good one to follow. Shane P. Hallam.
Yeah. This has been one of the most valuable fantasy football discussions for me. I appreciate this very much. I love and Finn to have my thoughts challenged. So appreciate you all. Now, literally why we enjoyed this, man. So we appreciate you bringing something up.
Nope.
The discussion I had with Zach a long time ago about Trey Lance also helped me so much. I was so sure Lance was going to get 2 to 3 years as a starter. That was a plan, clearly, I think. But again, risk management. Yep. I'm glad he could help you out there. I thought it was a near guarantee. Yeah, always be nervous of yourself when you again, it's like with my tiers, and I'm trying to do better at this too. Have less and less that you think is pretty certain, less and less. Like 40% of we had a great top 12 wide receivers this year, right? I love all 12, apart from Nico, but maybe also Nico, because that was cool for other people. 40%, 4 of them on average are going to repeat. How's that possible? Like, certainty is always suspect. Luckily, I didn't trade for Lance then. Okay, that worked out. 2 to 3 years. Yeah, I got you. So maybe it's that I recognize my weaknesses. Yeah, I mean, that's also why I think it's a good way of playing. Like, if you find this area where you're prone to do this or prone to do that, 1, you can try and improve it. 2, you can try and substitute someone else. I do that all the time at quarterback. And literally just substitute someone else's thoughts. It's not ideal. I like to do things myself, but some things I'm just weaker at. You have to acknowledge it. Or, and this is a great other option, not a third option, another option, all equal, and find a way of playing that mitigates it. I think that's a solid way of thinking about it. And that isn't always, or sometimes you can't always come up with a way. And if you think this will work for you, I think it's definitely viable. I can tell you that. Yeah. It might be objectively better for you. I think that's an interesting way of thinking about it. And maybe I've got unlucky with prospects and lucky with breakouts. I also, it's like I keep saying about Marshall, as much fun as it might be to say, yeah, like the results don't match what could have been. Like, I don't know, it fits what I thought, but I want to get to a place where I'm actually thinking the person was bad. Like, easily could have just been results. And they could have gone the other way. Jets, good spot for Bowers. I think anywhere's a good spot for Bowers, but I really don't tilt on landing spot too much. I don't like the Jets as a landing spot in general. Some organizations through some periods just seem to be bad for players. I hate to say that. Sorry, Jets fans. There's a window of growth, though. Buffalo was that for years, right? Like, honestly, if someone went for Buffalo, it's the same thing. I was like, that's bad. And now it's pretty good. So, yeah, it's not forever. But, Jets would be fine for Bowers for me. I wouldn't hate it. Colts for Bowers. I think everyone would get so uber excited for the Colts for Bowers. They need... For fantasy, it feels like they need a little more Studley power, but they seem pretty happy with going the Belichick. We have good players at good contracts. And I honestly think NFL-wise, it's a really smart approach, even though I've seen some people hate on it. They're locking them up before the money can get extreme. I like it.
I
What were you
still
gonna say?
don't. I'm still not sold that Anthony Richardson is a good
I'm not.
thrower, a good passer. I think he's a good fantasy scorer, but I like. And people are comparing him to Jalen Hurts, and Jalen Hurts is 10
Sorry.
times the passer that, yeah, but
Yeah, that's crazy. I think that's a good point on the Colts because we haven't mentioned it in a while, but I'm still way on the under on Richardson. But Zach's also right at the points could be there anyway. Jags have to take a wide receiver, right? Have to? No, it seems they're walking away from that passing game a little bit. It feels like that's one of the problems with Lawrence right now. I think in this class, a lot of teams are going to take some shot at it. I don't know how much they're going to prioritize it. I'm really not a draft analyst, though, to be clear. Like if I did, I would suck at it. So, the Martha Pittman was for Stuck. Yeah. And like I say, I actually think the value wasn't too far off on that. It's kind of the trade that we're going to hate because we're not playing that way. But
Right.
she should be kind of in your wheelhouse if you're playing the way you're playing. If you know what I mean? I think that's what Zach was trying to say as well. I hate it, but that makes sense for you.
It's the Rodney Dangerfield. Oh, it's a terrible hat. It looks good on you, though.
I think I've matured a bit since then. And that when I recognize myself being very confident in something, it's signaled to me to at least pause and reconsider, but also don't fear your own confidence in general. I generally think I have the same approach, but sometimes you have to recognize that you need confidence, and sometimes you deserve confidence too. Like it's okay that you're confident if you're good at something. Like
you do the trust but verify.
Yeah. I was rostering Royce Freeman, and he just signed with Dallas. Am I right to kind of think I just struck silver? Might get a few starts here and there. Yes, I wouldn't. Yeah, that's the value of running back. Also, over the next few weeks, let the hype grow a little bit, but you can start adding him to trades as a plus, whereas before he just would have been why are you giving me a Royce Freeman? Like that's honestly where my mind goes. But yeah, the value of running backs, even that deep, is they can get starts. Yeah,
probably nickel plated, but whatever.
It's why those guys, and to a point, roster running backs shouldn't be sitting on the waiver wire. To be honest, Royce Freeman, sure, should be rostered. Find room for that John Michie at the bottom of your roster needs to be cut. I mean, Nikhil Harry, to hose myself a bit. Donald Mooney, drop. Mooney's a little interesting to still roster, but he's potentially a cut. He's a wide receiver.
He's on that. If you got short benches, yeah.
Like I wouldn't cut him for any random running back, but I would cut him for a pretty decent bet on a start or two running back kind of a thing. I have so many Falcons right now. Bijan, London, Mooney, and more. I hope it works out for you. I feel like I'm a little less excited for the Falcons than most people. I don't know why. I don't know. I like Bijan Robinson for sure.
I like the fact that the offensive coordinator that they signed is a Shanahan disciple. He was the guy that I wanted the Patriots to sign. So I am more bullish on the Falcons than I have been in a long time. So you could be okay. Cool. All right, Pete, I think we did it. We're at the end. I'm going to look over there.